The ticking time bomb that nobody wants to talk about. Could this blow up in our lifetime? How about the high cost of housing and mortgage interest rates? I can't even imagine being a young person today and trying to afford a $750,000 house. I just talked to my wife about this yesterday. We built our home in 2011 for $200,000. A month or so ago, our neighbors, who built in 2015, slightly smaller home, 2,300 square feet compared to 2,500 of ours, sold their home for $500,000. The buyers massively overpaid, of course, as houses now are going for around $430,000 to $450,000, but still, double the value in just over 10 years? No way that's real. We couldn't afford to live here if we didn't already. Combine that to our 15-year refinance in 2020 at 1.99% interest rate, and we are never moving anytime soon, not until this house is paid off at least. I feel terrible for families just starting off. Everything is so inflated. The subscription everything model becoming completely unsustainable for the average person. Software, entertainment, heated seats in a car, grocery delivery. Eventually, people's incomes just won't be able to handle 1,000 tiny monthly payments. Something's got to give. I mean, fingers crossed for this one. Just let people own stuff again. My fiancé and I are in our 30s and kept binders of DVDs and seasons of shows. They're nice to have since our Wi-Fi has been going out more and more often due to crazy weather and crap. Pension crisis. The number of people saving to retire at all is scarily low. Yep, this is a big one. I try to save as much as I can, even with a good job, but I worry about this. It's sad to look at your old age and think you can either work yourself until you can't and then basically rot away, or just, solve it yourself. Came here to say this. Social safety nets are being eroded and the cost of living is skyrocketing at the same time as more and more people are living paycheck to paycheck with no retirement savings. Plus, automation and AI will continue to erode the job market over the next couple of decades. Even if you think AI is overblown right now, which it is, in 20 years it's going to be a lot better. Throw in increasing competition from globalization and a lot of people will be forced into retirement even before they're ready. The education crisis. From the stories I've heard, students are expressing a lack of basic skills and common sense, which will definitely come back to bite them when they're adults. Current students will be very underprepared for life after school, and you just have to listen to teachers' stories for the world of hurt coming in 10 years. I'm still cautiously optimistic about our future generation, in some parts of the world at least. Where I live, there's actually a bit of a revolution against screens in class, so we'll see where that goes. But also, the Zoomers I know all seem pretty smart, driven, and hardworking. I'd be more worried about them becoming burned out and disillusioned than anything else. The fight for fresh water. Yes, this will eventually be a crisis. Not a conspiracy theory. I think a lot of powerful folks know this and they're maneuvering to control it. Subprime car market. The volume of debt in car finance is huge and depressed resale value of cars coming off of lease is far below what was expected. The Porsche Taycan is a perfect example of this, and now Porsche has a chunky black hole in its books because it can't get book value for these cars. In fact, the car market period, people are now taking out 7-year loans on cars. It's ridiculous. The whole mass surveillance and legal ID for everything bullcrap that's currently going on everywhere. Protecting the children. Yeah, right. And megacorporations like Meta and Google collecting every bit of data they can. People will either massively push back or privacy will completely die. I'm afraid that a debt bubble is brewing. Auto foreclosures are climbing. Same with homes. Quite rapidly too. July 2025 saw a 13% increase from the year before in home foreclosures. This is an already prohibitive market to enter. I think it's crazy, but I'm not an expert. Time for the fourth once-in-a-lifetime economic crisis of my lifetime. The job market in the US is collapsing. This could be AI, it could be corporate greed, it could be a lot of other things or a mix of things. But this feels different than the other times because there's little awareness or market correlation like in past recessions. We're not in a recession. Unless you're actively looking for a job, you probably don't understand how bad the job market is. This is so true. Here in Germany, the news still talks about there being a shortage of skilled workers, and that really is a huge problem. The reality is that me and all of my friends who graduated college in a technical field are unable to find a job after months of searching and hundreds of applications. I remember as a student applying to kitchen porter jobs in bars or pubs, looking for a minimum of 1 year's experience, and they wouldn't entertain the idea of training someone on, and then seeing news reports saying that the industry is crying out for staff. No, not that kind of staff. We want someone with 5 or more years' experience willing to work for starter wages. Someone so desperate that they'll tolerate any level of crap and thank their exploiter for the opportunity. Then we can keep them so tired, poor, and overworked that they don't have time to look for a better one. It's the perfect system from the employer's point of view. Hopefully, Beetlejuice is a supernova. I'd really like to witness that. I've never seen a supernova blow up, but if it's anything like my old Chevy Nova, it'll light up the sky. Car prices in the United States. Eventually, we'll start to see poorer Americans turn towards motorcycles as a daily driver because we just can't afford cars anymore. Think Vietnam. Nobody makes cheap little crap boxes anymore. It's so sad. There's only so many used cars on the market, and attrition means that every so often, something gets taken out of service that won't ever work again. And all of the new cars are big pricey motherfrickers that a normal middle-class person would have to go into debt for. There's a lot of anger out there. When I was a kid growing up, or even as a young adult, I didn't see this kind of anger where people are so angry that they could really hurt someone over a minor incident. Things that are said, things that people have actually done, indicate that this anger is on the rise. The anger is not from one specific issue, but several. Most of the time, it's been mostly talk and little action. But I fear that those who are so angry are going to commit acts of violence against other people who they see as the enemy. These people are very dangerous to anyone they come into contact with and could blow up at any time. Arctic methane. I believe as the gap between the haves and have-nots continues to widen, we're heading towards some potentially violent times, and we're already seeing it. Juggings, following someone after they go to a bank or ATM and then stealing their money at the next stop, are increasing tremendously. How many celebrities and athletes' homes are broken into while they're out of town? The smash and grabs or the mob smash and grabs? With social media enabling groups or mobs of people to quickly come together, it seems likely that this behavior only increases and mobs will only get bigger, which could overwhelm any law enforcement. Major Pacific Northwest earthquake causing a loss in coastline elevation and significant flooding changes to the coast. Although, I truly hope not. I worry about Cascadia as well. I think the level of changes to the coastline and east to the Willamette Valley will be on a scale that's nearly impossible for most of us to imagine. Chronic stress, the #1 trigger behind most health problems. Until I had a nervous breakdown last year, I never appreciated the neurological impact of the stress I'd been under for decades. The hippocampus actually shrinks due to chronic stress, and has resulted in me losing decades of episodic memory, alongside memory fragmentation so that things are out of order in my mind. I'm physically in my 50s, but my brain is closer to being in its 70s. And the only treatment, by the way? Reduce stress. Easier said than done, right? Biological terror attacks created by a crazed zealot using gene editing equipment ordered off the internet. Kurjashakt had a good video about this a while back. Basically, their point was that the barrier to entry for creating bioweapons will move from nation-states spending billions of dollars to guy in his basement using AI and CRISPR. It's something that isn't often spoken about in public, but it could be hugely problematic. Look how much chaos and societal impact COVID had. Now, imagine multiple viruses with 20-fold the lethality being released constantly. And this isn't even just limited to people who want to hurt anyone. One hypothetical example I was given once was the idea of someone manufacturing a disease that is ultimately not lethal or particularly problematic, but whose main distinguishing factor is that its structure has a big, obvious nicotine molecule on it. The idea being that this is just a sort of spreadable vaccine that teaches your body that nicotine is an infection, thus meaning that if someone uses tobacco, their body will react with fever and such, and they release it with purely good intentions to discourage tobacco use. There's so much that can go wrong with such an effort, and the cost could be catastrophic. I hope I'm gone before Mother Earth throws a tantrum and does a soft reset. One towers above the rest as far as humanitarian crises it's going to cause. India is getting too hot to survive in for humans. No country is going to be able to easily absorb the huge numbers of people escaping the inhospitable areas. It's going to be really bad. To put this into context, if the trend of increasing air conditioning use continues at the current rate, India will be using more electricity to power just air conditioners than all the electricity the continent of Africa uses in a year for everything by 2050. and that is not that far away. The big earthquake in LA. I was very young when the 1994 one happened. I could only hope that it will be like that one hilariously corny Dwayne Johnson movie. And yes, I am being silly because this is the second doom and gloom topic I've done in a few short days, and frankly, it's not making me feel nice. Hopefully back to some silly fart joke and instant karma stories soon. The next story sums up my current feeling quite well, actually. Frick me, I should not have read these answers. Water shortages. Kessler syndrome. It's basically a runaway effect of debris in orbit. The more debris, the more likely for catastrophic collisions, causing more debris, and that debris causing more collisions, all until space becomes inaccessible due to millions of untrackable pieces of metal hurtling around the planet at tens of thousands of miles per hour. AI misuse. Frank Herbert's Dune was set in a universe where thinking machines had been banned. Back in the day, it seemed like sci-fi goofiness. Sure seems like we could easily see a time where it's a legit threat to a number of critical services humanity relies on for basic functioning. We're talking infrastructure management, data systems, historical record keeping, those kinds of things. The last time inequality was this bad across the West, in the Gilded Age, it led to repeated revolutions and war. Eventually, the rich figured out that paying tax to fund welfare and income redistribution was a better option than hanging off lampposts. They forget these lessons, and here we are again. So I predict we'll witness an explosion in the violence inherent in the system soon. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? Mass heat deaths, drought, and then survival migration from those areas. If people think migrants are a problem now, 20 years from now it'll be like that zombie movie where they're crawling over those below them to get into a compound. And they aren't after your stuff or your jobs, they're after a climate that's 5 degrees cooler at least, because wet bulb temps are driving them to travel. People not having basic necessities to live. It definitely brings out the worst in people. Russia's thawing tundra will release enough methane to kill quite a few people and drive even more wars for land by its leaders. China's current lack of water. They've got 20% of the world's population and less than 10% of its water, with much of it not potable and lots of it being contaminated, and a third of its territory not arable and much of it mountainous, rocky or desert, or not easily desirable or livable. They're screwed, so the rest of us will be soon too, by climate refugees, land grabs and wars over fishing, crops and livestock. One that's been bothering me for a long time is the fear of when the next big solar flare or coronal mass injection will hit. If one as powerful as the Carrington event hits today, we may as well say goodbye to basically all technology and power for at least a few months to a few years. And to be honest, we're due for a big one anytime soon. Well, the sun's been a bit angry lately, and there was a far-sighted full halo CME, and now the sunspot that made that is slowly coming our way. I hope it's big, just not Carrington event big. Retirement plans in my country. Higher education. I'm not against universities, but in the last 30 years it's gone from something aspirational and meaningful to a corporate money grab and worthless. You're already seeing graduates going into entry-level positions. What's the point in putting yourself into tens of thousands of pounds of debt just to be an office junior or a checkout assistant at Tesco's? Once people realize it's all just waste, admission numbers will drop, universities will go bankrupt, and all of those tower blocks built of cardboard and sold as student accommodation will be worthless. It's crazy for me to think that there are places where you have to put yourself under 10 to 15 years of debt just to get into higher education, when here in crappy backwater Eastern European country, with reasonably achievable high school graduation, the government just pays for it all. I'm so sorry for you all. At this point, I think an easier to answer question is what isn't a frickin' ticking time bomb that will explode in my lifetime? The Winds of Winter being published. Aliens invading and conquering Earth in the next 10 years is more likely than Winds of Winter ever being released. Social Security. I'm never going to see that money. It's pretty much legal theft at this point for anyone under 50. The use of thermonuclear weapons. Anything you can think of seems to be going off at more or less the same time in the present. I was born in 1991, barely got to the point I'm kind of relatively successful personally and professionally, and instead of keeping this positive trend, all kinds of external bullcrap turns up. Pandemic, war, economic crisis, nuclear threats, social collapse, all kinds of dumb conflicts, climate change, and all of this is led by buttholes in their 70s minimum. We're talking Trump, Putin, Xi, Erdogan, Orban, Khamenei, and Netanyahu. None of whom seem to have anything better to do with their lives than ruin things for the rest of us. At this point, there isn't really a time bomb that I don't expect to blow during my lifetime. The housing market bubble in the US. House prices are through the roof. If 2008 was any indication, there'll be massive turmoil once the bubble pops. Just wait till you look at the practices that surround buy now, pay later services like Affirm or Klarna. They're bundling bad debt and selling it to a company named 6th Street, which funnily enough was founded in 2009 by an ex-Goldman Sachs partner. If you see any similarities, don't worry about it. Well, 2008 pre-crash prices occurred because of a massive amount of unaffordable variable rate mortgages that suddenly went kaput. Currently, the prices are high because of scarcity, corporate homeownership, and people locked into low fixed rates giving them an incentive not to move. That's not a bubble that can burst as easily. If things continue the way they are, we'll very soon have a global water crisis on our hands. Soon after, agriculture will become impossible or almost such in many parts of the world. We're absolutely not prepared for what's coming our way, and it's going to hit the world like a speeding train. My husband's grandma died in her 90s a few years back, and she made us promise not to move to California. We've moved around a lot. She asked us to try to stay near the Great Lakes. She was very convinced about the water crisis, and I don't know. I've learned to take advice from people who grew up in the Depression. The critical energy infrastructure hub in Portland, Oregon, is essentially a primed mega-disaster, being today ready to succumb to the effects of a large earthquake off the Oregon coast. It is a massive facility for agricultural and petrochemical transfer and storage. Many of the tanks aren't up to current seismic code, and the facility itself is built on alluvial soils, which will liquefy with enough sustained shaking. The combined spill chemicals will form toxic and flammable clouds, and human loss would be very extensive as traffic lanes are congested and the river burns. Solutions are difficult as stakeholders are diverse and many, with blame enough to go around for not addressing the problem now. Truly apocalyptic for that area. The Canadian housing market. I know it's been like this for almost 30 years now, but it really does feel like we're at a breaking point. I'm not really sure if the idea of that gives me hope, as it's frankly the only reasonable way for me to ever own a home in my lifetime, or if it fills me with dread as our GDP is basically propped up by real estate. Either way, it's going to be one hell of an explosion. Welcome to How It Is Over the Rest of the World, my friend. I honestly don't know a country where people aren't indicating that the whole getting into the housing market thing isn't worse than ever. The delegation of congressional authority to the executive branch over the past several decades. Why 2038? I was scrolling down for this answer. Interestingly, an OS fix won't be enough because somewhere in an application stack there can still be 32-bit Unix dates. I retired and left behind a bunch of PHP scripts that would fail because they use 32-bit timestamps. You'd need a PHP version where ints are 64 bits to fix it. I'm not worried because the company will be out of business by 2038 anyway. Hopefully some sort of political revolution that erases the two-party system. People here actually have to care for this to happen. Here in the US, we can barely get people to participate in politics in the first place. If other people near 30 or younger can't afford a house, what will we buy? RVs? Tiny homes? Rent apartments till we die? Homeless? I mean, this is going to be a crisis. How about our 401k contributions being allowed to be bet on cryptocurrency and private equity? Trillions of dollars tied to people's retirement accounts will enter highly volatile markets. I don't think people understand what you're even talking about because it's so new. A new law passed that basically allows companies to use your 401ks to bail out their speculative investments. Everyone needs to make sure they check their contributions as soon as possible. Taiwan. The Chinese regime has made a deadline for the military to be prepared for this. They've built massive landing crafts specifically made for invading Taiwan, as well as mock-ups made of US ships in the Chinese desert used for target practice. The Taiwanese are too naive to believe this is coming. Westerners don't understand how massive of an impact this invasion would have. And you'd best believe that the chimp in the White House doesn't give a single flying F about Taiwan if the People's Republic of China gives him a sweet enough deal. Our national debt, as it appears most of our current politicians are using their positions for personal gain, knowing that they'll be dead or out of office when the real crap hits the fan. Crypto bubble. Pokemon card bubble too. It's ridiculous at the moment. Surely it'll go back to normal eventually. Endgame capitalism, which is fast approaching. 20th century was the golden age of capitalism, but the system itself is not self-correcting or sustainable like everyone claims. It eventually devolves into what we're heading towards: complete collapse. The system exponentially feeds the top. At the end stages, 100 people will own everything, with a small, wealthy minority behind, while the rest will be struggling to survive. We're not there yet, but we're not too far off either. People will start to revolt and there'll be an irreversible class war. I hope people remember to bring their pitchforks, because the people are going to have their day in the sun once again. To be honest, I doubt a whole lot of people in France realized their whole world was about to collapse as the French Revolution began. A year or two later, there were kings and queens getting guillotined in the public square. Crap can get real crazy when massive amounts of people hit a tipping point. It can get real crazy, real fast. What's a quote from a fictional character that changed your life? We accept the love we think we deserve. I think that if I ever have kids and they're upset, I won't tell them that there are people starving in China or anything like that, because it wouldn't change the fact that they were upset. And even if somebody else has it much worse, that doesn't really change the fact that you have what you have. That's from The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I don't know if I'm being cliché. Nothing worth having is easy to come by. Dr. Robert Kelso. A boy who idealizes war is perplexed why a war hero wants to retire to become a farmer. He asks the wise warrior why he seems to despise war, and this is the warrior's response: there is more honor in a field well plowed than one steeped in blood. Many of the truths we cling to depend largely on your point of view. Ben Kenobi. I survived because the fire inside burned brighter than the fire around me. Joshua Graham in Fallout New Vegas. I think one that resonates with me is when Captain Vimes says about his alcoholism, "One's too many, two's not enough." And that's when I knew that cutting down wouldn't work. I'd have to completely stop. I've been sober nearly 5 years now. It's possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That's not weakness, that's life. Jean-Luc Picard. Tomorrow's the day you'll pay the bills. Tomorrow's the day you'll grow up and start acting responsible. But tomorrow never comes for you because it's always so conveniently a day away. I think this came from Susie in Hey Arnold. I had to copy-paste because I forgot the original quote verbatim, but the "tomorrow never comes" part will always stick with me despite me being a massive procrastinator. You can't keep blaming yourself. Just blame yourself once and move on. Homer Simpson, one of the wisest pieces of advice I've ever heard. Homer really does have his moments of brilliance in the show, and you have to look at the fact that despite his sheer idiocy, he's managed to strike up a work-life balance that has largely made him happy. He has just enough to provide for himself and his family, and has his main priority, making sure his loved ones come before him. I of course am referring to the good Simpsons seasons, not the later ones where he turns into a selfish moron 24/7. I'd trade it all for a little more, C. Montgomery Burns. I saw some of my friends become big, and they don't even answer calls and don't have an honest reply for a question. I remember this quote, and it's incredible. Friends, family, religion. These are the 3 demons you must slay if you wish to succeed in business. Mr. Burns may well just be a caricature of certain rich people, but at least he wears it on his sleeve and doesn't hide behind false virtue. The hero decides to give their life to save the day, and because of their sacrifice, the good guys win. The survivors all cheer, and everybody lives happily ever after. But the hero never gets to see that ending. They'll never know if their sacrifice actually made a difference. They'll never know if the day was really saved. In the end, they just have to have faith. Ain't that a witch? Epsilon from Red vs. Blue. How lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. Winnie the Pooh. I'm a grown man, and reading the end of The House of Pooh Corner left me feeling a kind of way I can't even describe. You know, it's at times like this, when I'm trapped in an airlock with a man from Beetlejuice and about to die of asphyxiation in deep space, that I really wish I'd listened to what my mother told me when I was young. Why? What did she tell you? Oh, I don't know. I didn't listen. Said by Arthur Dent. I think Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has so many gems. I can't recall the exact words, but I think the definition of flight is the best quote of anything I've read. In order to accomplish flight, simply throw yourself at the ground and miss. I'm a quitter. I come from a long line of quitters. It's amazing I'm here at all. Bernard Black from Black Books. Some people will always need help, but that doesn't mean they're not worth helping. Mira Reed from Game of Thrones. There are no choices. Nothing but a straight line. The illusion comes afterwards when you ask, why me, and what if? When you look back and see the branches, like a pruned bonsai tree, or forked lightning. If you'd done something differently, it wouldn't be you. It would be someone else looking back, asking a different set of questions. Max Payne, in Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne. Personal isn't the same as important. This is said by both Captain Carrot and Granny Weatherwax in the Discworld books by Terry Pratchett. I mean, Sir Terry Pratchett's books have too many of these to count, so here's a few of the best. There is no justice. There's just us. There's no greys, only white that's got grubby. I'm surprised you don't know that. And sin, young man, is when you treat people as things, including yourself. That's what sin is. It's a lot more complicated than that. No, it ain't. When people say things is a lot more complicated than that, they means they're getting worried that they won't like the truth. People as things. That's where it starts. Patronizing is a big word. Zoology is really quite short. Are you listening? Good. Now, if you trust in yourself and believe in your dreams and follow your star, you'll still be beaten by people who spent their time working hard and learning things and weren't so lazy. Goodbye. Them as can do has to do for them as can't, and someone has to speak up for them as has no voices. And of course, the reason that the rich were so rich, Vimes reasoned, was because they managed to spend less money. Take Boots, for example. He earned $38 a month plus allowances. A really good pair of leather boots cost $50. But an affordable pair of boots, which was sort of okay for a season or two and then leaked like hell when the cardboard gave out, they cost about $10. Those were the kind of boots that Vimes always bought, and wore until the soles were so thin that he could tell where he was in the city on foggy nights by the feel of the cobbles. But the thing was that good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that would still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time. While the poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. This was the Captain Samuel Vimes' boots theory of socio-economic unfairness. The best part about that being that he eventually gets a really good pair of leather boots, but hates them because the soles are so good that he can't feel where he is in the city with them. We live with dignity, we can't die with it. Dr. Gregory House. Time is an illusion, doubly so. It's real life, and in real life, you can't always win, said Gerald in Hey Arnold. This reminds me of a great and very real quote about parenting from the excellent show Ted Lasso. His mother reminds him when he's having a tough time knowing if he's raising his son right that sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but most of the time you just tie. You just keep playing. In other news, when the narrator was 6 years old and dumb, he really didn't like Hey Arnold. I feel like I would have appreciated it a lot more if I were a couple of years older when it was airing. And someday, you're going to look around and realize that everybody loves you, but nobody likes you. And that's the loneliest feeling in the world. BoJack Horseman. I don't know how many years I got left on this earth, so I'm going to get real weird with it. Everybody's favorite degenerate on Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Get busy living or get busy dying. Andy Dufresne, The Shawshank Redemption. I expect nothing and I'm still let down. Dewey, Malcolm in the Middle. It's like those lights in the sky. They all look the same from here, but that doesn't make them less pretty. River Wiles.
This is my family. I found it all on my own. It's a little broken, but still good. Yeah, still good.
Stitch. Although that would compete in that film with
Ohana means family. A family means no one gets left behind or forgotten.
A person's smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it. Agent K, Men in Black. Be loyal to what matters. Arthur Morgan. I remember thinking before the game was launched, this guy seems like a total jerk. There's no way Rockstar can make him a more likable character than Marston. Now that I've had a few months to stew on it, I honestly think he might be my favorite video game character of all time. Probably top 5 protagonists in all fiction. The BoJack Horseman quote that I always remember was the jogging baboon. It gets easier. Every day it gets a little easier. But you've got to do it every day. That's the hard part. But it does get easier. The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world. Everyone always has a story they tell themselves to justify bad decisions. It never matters. You're always alone in your actions. Hawk from Dragon Age Inquisition. A wise man can learn more from his enemies than a fool from his friends. Rush. People like to invent monsters and monstrosities, then they seem less monstrous themselves. When they get blind drunk, cheat, steal, beat their wives, starve an old woman, when they kill a trapped fox with an axe or riddle the last existing unicorn with arrows, they like to think that the Bane entering cottages at daybreak is more monstrous than they are. They feel better then. They find it easier to live. Geralt of Rivia, The Last Wish. Not everything's a lesson. Sometimes you just fail. Dwight K. Schrute. The K does not stand for fart, by the way. Sucking at something is the first step to being sorta good at something. Jake the dog. You can handle anything for 10 seconds. Kimmy Schmidt. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Losing people is a part of life, but that doesn't mean you stop letting them in. Lego Batman. That movie came out shortly after I lost my grandpa. He was one of 2 people I was closest with. When he died, I went through a really rough phase. Ever since I heard that phrase, it stuck with me. Today me will live in the moment, unless it's unpleasant, in which case me will eat a cookie. Cookie Monster. I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them. Andrew Bernard, aka the Nod Dog. This quote actually made my friends start saying, "This is the good old days, guys," whenever it's just a really nice moment and there's a lull. I love it so much. Better to serve a good man than to rule with an evil one. Merlin. That quote has stuck with me for so long and I have thought about it many times. Well, this is probably a more healthy take than the saying, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, which, if you put aside the religious aspect, does imply that power is preferable to being good to each other, and screw that. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment. Gandalf, Lord of the Rings. When you do things right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all. God on Futurama. Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something. Wesley and the Princess Bride. Never half-ass 2 things. Whole-ass 1 thing. Confidence. It's the food of the wise man, but the liquor of the fool. Vikram in The Office. Pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. True humility is the only antidote to shame. Uncle Iroh in Avatar: The Last Airbender. What's the most important step a man can take? Always the next step. Dalinar Colin. There's no geographical solution to a spiritual problem. Tony Soprano replying to someone who wanted to get away from it all. If you want to know what a man's like, judge him on the way he treats his inferiors, not his equals, said Sirius Black. It always really stuck with me because I think that's really solid advice. Oh, the past can hurt, but the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it. Rafiki in The Lion King. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it'll beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Rocky Balboa. An old friend once told me something that gave me great comfort. Something he'd read. He said that Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin never died. They simply became music. Dr. Robert Ford in Westworld. It's important to draw wisdom from different places. If you take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. Uncle Iroh, once again. Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you. Tyrion Lannister. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you! Samwise Gamgee is the friend we all need. And although it's less inspiring in the moment, this other one is, if anything, more profound. By all rights, we shouldn't even be here. But we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had a lot of chances of turning back, only they didn't. Because they were holding on to something. What are we holding on to, Sam? that there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. That thing gets me every time. The problem's not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem, Jack Sparrow. The best answer is usually the easiest one, and I'll be honest, killing you is hard, GLaDOS. Taking your own life, interesting expression, taking it from who? Once it's over, it's not you who'll miss it. Your own death is something that happens to everyone else. Your life is not your own. Keep your hands off it. Sherlock in the BBC. That quote was like a punch to the gut. Thor's mum, Frigga, in Endgame, when she says, "Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be. The measure of a person, a hero, is how they succeed at being who they are." One is never alone with a rubber duck. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I take this one to heart and have a rubber duck with me almost anywhere I go. I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It's what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are. Mewtwo, Pokemon, the first movie. Oh boy, I didn't think that the bloody Pokemon movie would have any sort of resonance to anyone 30 years later, but there you go, a genetically cloned psychic cat spitting truths. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I'll face my fear. I'll permit it to pass over me and through me, and when it has gone past me, I'll turn to see fear's path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Maud Deeb. "You can't give that to her," she screamed. "It's not safe." "It's a sword," said the Hogfather. "They're not meant to be safe." "She's a child," shouted Crumley. "It's educational." "What if she cuts herself?" "That will be an important lesson." The Hogfather by Terry Pratchett, in which death takes on the role of a Santa Claus-like figure in that universe for one night. Anyone can wear the mask. You could wear the mask. If you didn't know that before, I hope you do now. Miles Morales. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. Said by Mordin Solus in Mass Effect 3. The Mass Effect trilogy is my favorite series in gaming. I still remember my first playthrough, keeping Rex alive, sacrificing Kaiden, trying to negotiate with the Council, planting the memorial on the crashed Normandy site, keeping everyone alive during the impossible mission, finally resolving the Geth-Quarian conflict, seeing Jack look after her own crew, but nothing made me stop, pause the game, and put the controller down like this moment with Mordin Solus. While not my favorite of the crew, that goes to my boy Legion. You do have a soul, my Geth friend. He, like myself, like Legion, was willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good of the galaxy and correct the mistakes of the past. You're right, Mordin. It had to be you. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. Thank you. Dark and difficult times lie ahead. Soon we must all face the choice of what is right and what is easy. Albus Dumbledore, Harry Potter. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Ferris Bueller. How much can a crown be worth when a crow can dine upon a king? Jaime Lannister. What is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? Parthenax. It's funny, when you look at somebody through rose-colored glasses, all of the red flags just look like flags. Wanda from BoJack Horseman. In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. Douglas Adams in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy. Yondu Udonta, Guardians of the Galaxy 2. We accept the love we think we deserve, said by Charlie's teacher in The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Death is lighter than a feather, duty heavier than a mountain. Alan Mandragoran. And remember, bad times are just times that are bad. Katrina from Animal Crossing. Knowledge, like air, is vital to life. No one should be denied it. V for Vendetta. Always try to be nice and never fail to be kind. The Doctor. Capaldi killed it with the delivery of so many lines. I don't know if it's just the words or how he said it, but I've kept it as something I try to do in life. Also, the line where he's trying to talk down a war on Earth. Something along the lines of, "And what do you do with that pain? You hold it tight until it burns, and you vow that no one should ever feel this way." Everyone I've cared for has either died or left me. Everyone, freaking except for you. So don't tell me I'd be safer with somebody else, because the truth is, I'd just be more scared. Ellie in The Last of Us. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Malcolm Merlin. In The Last Jedi, Yoda said, "The greatest teacher failure is." He always has the best lines.
I was so scared of becoming my father, mostly because I never thought I could. I mean, how can you become someone so great, so selfless? I guess you can only try. I spent so long fighting for a world I wanted, didn't realize what you needed.
Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III. Every man dies, but not every man really lives. William Wallace, not to be confused with Wallace and Gromit. By experiencing both victory and defeat, running away and shedding tears, a man will become a man. It's okay to cry, but you have to move on. Shanks in One Piece. What made somebody automatically qualify for world's biggest D-bag? I was at an Apple service provider waiting for an iPod Nano replacement when this guy, who was talking to another Apple employee, started threatening her. He was furious because she wouldn't replace his iPad. She was extremely and unbelievably patient and repeatedly tried to explain to him that the store was just an authorized service provider and not an Apple store, and that they'd need approval from Apple's regional office to replace his iPad. He asked for a piece of paper, scrawled his Twitter handle on it, and repeatedly told the girl to check it to see how many followers he had. "You'll be surprised," he said, "and I'll be tweeting about this. Show your manager and maybe they'll change their mind." He also said his number of followers will put a dent on Apple and that he'll never buy an Apple product again. He also repeatedly threw his iPhone down onto the counter to demonstrate that he couldn't break it. He was still at it when I left. Nuts. And the kicker? I jotted down the Twitter handle that he gave the girl and looked at it when I got home. It was owned by some Canadian hockey player with like 200,000 plus followers who was in another part of the world and who looked nothing like the guy at the store. I mean, at least he didn't say I'm a big deal on this website called Reddit. I worked at a local Cold Stone when I was a kid. This shop was owned by a family who had kids in my high school, so I was pretty close with the owners. On a particularly busy afternoon, I was whipping up someone's ice cream when I overhear things getting heated at the cash register. One of our owners, Lynn, was working there, and an upset woman was complaining about the price of her order. Lynn broke down each item and how much tax was, to which the customer responded that she deserved a discount, and if she didn't get one that she'd be calling her good friends who owned the establishment. Lynn calmly said, "I'm Lynn, and I own this establishment. Please leave. I've never seen someone turn red so fast." Bartending once, I picked up a table so that a server could go home early, and the guests at the table were really rude to me. They wouldn't call me by my name, they just kept calling me different racial slurs against white people, even though I'm Mexican. I smiled and gave them great service, but it was clear they were trying to get something for free. When they asked for my manager, I couldn't hear what they were telling him, but the people seated at the end of the bar near their table spoke up and told my manager they were lying. We ended up calling the police when they refused to pay their tab, which was over $100. They ended up paying it, and then my manager comped $10 off so that I could get a tip. I tried to buy the nice couple at the bar around, and my manager comped that too. This makes me think that stores should hire people to stand around in plain clothes and berate D-bags when the opportunity shows itself. Although this does seem like it would be both peak entertainment and contribute to a massive rise in staff morale, I don't see many retailers going for it, both based on the expense and the fact that most of them bend over backwards to accommodate even the worst possible customers. I used to work at the local grocery store during high school as a bagger and cashier. One day, a man walked in with a coupon for $2 off a $6 chicken. After explaining to him that the coupon was expired and that I couldn't accept it, he calmly says, "Oh really? Well, I'll get it anyway." A couple of hours later, one of my coworkers came running in yelling that everyone's tires were flat. We reviewed the surveillance footage, which showed him walk outside, throw the chicken into the air, and freak the frick out and start slashing everyone's tires. He ended up having to pay for all the damages and was no longer allowed near any of the employees. Are you serious? For $2? What the frick is wrong with people? "I know the owner and I will get you fired." "My dad's the owner and he warned me you're a butthole. Now go away." Huh! I had a similar one only last weekend. I was just about to start work at a nightclub, so it must have been getting on for midnight. I'm stood at the side of the bar talking things over with a girl called Becca, who's out of sight in the office. Becca was about to open the upstairs bar for me when this drunken girl shoves her way up to me and exclaims, "Get the manager for me now." I took a second to assess the situation because this girl looks a little out of place in the club, She's clearly been drinking heavily and could be in some sort of trouble. I place my water on the bar, and I start to ask her if something has happened when she butts in with, "It's 12 o'clock and you haven't opened upstairs yet. You're stood here chatting up barmaids and you're ruining my night." Okay, I think to myself out loud. By my watch, it's 11:55 and I'm heading upstairs now, so if you can bear with me for… And I'm cut off again. "Don't you know who I am? My uncle is the owner and you are out of a fricking job." I couldn't help but grin at this last statement. "See her?" I say to the drunk girl as Becca emerges from the office. "Her father owns the place. And you two don't look very related now, do you?" This drunk girl, clearly outraged by this point, decides to just take a swing at me. Like, what? Becca responds by wrenching the girl's arm behind her back, jabbing her keys into the girl's side, and running the now squealing drunk girl out the front door and onto the cold, wet pavement. Turns out the drunk girl was one of Becca's little sister's friends who was out celebrating her 18th birthday and thought she could get special treatment if she dropped the owner's name every 5 minutes. They'd already let her in the club for free, you see. This morning I found out she ended up getting banned from half the clubs in the city centre for 4 weeks. Instant karma. I used to work in retail a few years back. Had some guy come in that tried to return everything that was far outside the return policy, over a year, and he was outraged when he was informed we couldn't return it for him. He started off slowly, saying what an outrage it was. Then he continued saying how everyone he was dealing with was incompetent. He eventually got so upset that his antics weren't working that he said he was going to bring a few of his weapons in and pointed at people saying, "I'm gonna shoot you, and you, and you." Needless to say, the police were called. 6 cop cars were waiting for him outside when his rant was finally over. When I was 18, I worked at Toys R Us, and a lot of people thought that it was a fun job because we're surrounded by toys. People get crazy about their fricking toys and games for their brat kids, but one kid always stands out. I was working the customer service desk, which entailed returns, checkouts, and answering phones. One day I was working the desk and there was a long line of people. Everyone was being very patient with me answering phones and helping everyone check out, but this one guy had an attitude right away. He kept mumbling about how horribly rude I was and that I wasn't working fast enough. He bought his crap and walked away. I thought that was over, but he quickly came back into the store and cut the line. He started telling me to find him a pair of scissors so he could open his purchase. I calmly explained that I didn't have a pair of scissors, and I really didn't, by the way. He then proceeded to come around the desk, physically push me out of the way, and started opening all of the drawers. My manager witnessed the whole thing and came over and told him to get out of the frickin' store. The guy then screamed at my manager to call the police and see if he cared. We didn't have to call the police because there was an off-duty one in line, and he quickly explained to the man that he was being detained until the police arrived. That quickly shut the guy the F up, and he was subsequently arrested for disorderly conduct and harassment. Enjoy your frickin' toys, you butthole. I am a retail monger, which the narrator is assuming is a misspelling of manager. My store has a really crappy price match policy. There's a few things we won't match. One of these is that you need to use a loyalty card to get the deal. I had an older gentleman come in to price match 5 bottles of Pepsi. We sold them for $1.50 and a competitor sold them for $1. We couldn't price match because the competitor deal needed their loyalty card. And this is where it went from 0 to crazy in 3 seconds. The guy grabbed one of the bottles, starts to open it and says, "Well, if you won't match it, I guess I have to pour this pop over your register. What are you going to do then?" Followed with a smirk. I kept my cool, didn't miss a beat, and stated, "Okay, I'm gonna have to call the cops then." He got super upset and couldn't understand why I'd call the cops for him, and I tried to explain that he just threatened to vandalize the store's property. After he understood, he walked out. All over $2.50. Anytime anyone says, "Don't you know who I am?" Ugh. Ah yes, the statement that guarantees the utterer a place in hell. It's been a while since I've seen that one, honestly. Annoying to know that there are a few people still out of touch enough to realize that it's more effective than a badge saying D-bag in signifying the amount of respect they should pay you. I didn't do anything about it, but this was my favorite. I have small accessories that I sell for one of our product lines. One of them costs $20, and shipping and handling via the mail was $4. Perfectly reasonable. Then this guy went off the rails because I wouldn't give him any deal. We have no margins on that kind of stuff, so I'm most certainly not going to cut any big deals. He threatened he'd post his sordid tale on all of the popular forums that pertained to the industry. I pretty much told him to go ahead, and I didn't think much about it. I came back in after the weekend, the guy went ahead and posted a bunch of new threads on all of the major forums and emailed me all of the links. I checked them all, and the forum community members pretty much all told him to stop being such a moron. I felt pretty smug about that. I once worked at a little gaming store next to a big retailer. I don't get any commission or anything, just helped kids pick out games or whatever. I sell the odd Xbox here or there. So some guy comes in asking me to match a retailer's deal on a Nintendo DS. For whatever management reason, I couldn't do it. He starts to get ticked off and there's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. So he leaves. I think nothing of it, and then he walks past about 15 minutes later and screams from the door, "I got it from this big retail store for whatever price, and I'm never coming back, you C-word." I was a 15-year-old girl. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I work in parking garages, so I see all kinds of overreactions. I had an elderly woman once refuse to pay the $39 for parking. I don't set the prices, shoot someone else. I went down willing to cut her some slack and charge her the validated rate at $20 if she'd let me keep a copy of her receipt. I no sooner rounded the corner than the old lady rushed over to me screaming with a terrified child next to her, ranting about how, "My father fought in the war and what you're doing to me isn't right." She went on to compare what I was doing to what the Germans did in World War II, and that if she wasn't allowed to leave the garage for free, that she'd stay in the garage and starve herself. I, of course, did what any young and aspiring manager would do, and I laughed at her. And then she spit on me. I also once had a guy who claimed to be an FBI agent threaten to have me deported while I was speaking to him over the intercom. I went down to speak to him in person, and being that I'm not from another country, his deportation threat had been taken away. The guy went on an absolutely bat-crap crazy rant about how foreigners were taking over the country and how the fat cat corporations were making all of the money while normal men lost their jobs. I asked him to see his badge, to which he gave me all kinds of bullcrap about not carrying when he's out of state. He then got out of the car and called the local police department, who came down, to which he made no mention of being an FBI agent. The cops informed him that he would indeed need to pay his bill before exiting, and that he was on the hook for the $39. In all cases, I go into these situations looking to give someone a break. I understand that after a day in the mall with your family, you sometimes forget to get your ticket validated. Most garage managers have the ability to overwrite the fee on your ticket, and if they say they aren't, they're lying to you. If you're nice to us, more often than not, we'll cut you a break. Giving us food also helps. In 2012, I told a client that he really needed to update his copies of Office 97 to the current version, if you can even call that an upgrade. I gave him a whole list of reasons why, including that Microsoft stopped releasing security updates for that version quite a while back. He flipped out and demanded that I call Microsoft and tell them that they needed to keep releasing security updates for Office 97. When I told him it didn't exactly work that way, he said, "Well, you just tell them who I am and make sure that they know that if they don't fix this, I'll never buy another version of Office again." Just, wow. I used to work at a sandwich shop, and my old boss was notoriously aggressive. To customers. He'd fight for his employees tooth and nail. One time, some irate idiot had something he wanted to discuss with my boss, and being in a rare accommodating mood, my boss said, "Just give me a moment to help this line of customers, and then you'll have my complete attention." This guy, not knowing how lucky he was, pressed his luck. After enduring another onslaught of verbal attacks, my boss handed the guy his card and said to call him later. On the back of the card, he had written, "Below me." I worked at a cafe about 2 years ago. We had an espresso ready to go, but no one knew who it belonged to. I decided to roam around the cafe with said espresso and asked any waiting customers if they'd ordered this coffee. So, after a few polite replies of, "Oh, no, sorry," I get to one business-looking man sitting with the owner of the fruit shop across the way. The owner had a bad reputation at my cafe as being a sleazebag, according to the girls. So I asked the businessman, "Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, mate, but did you order an espresso?" The businessman looked at me and said, "No." So I began to walk away, and as I did, he says, "Oi, it's pronounced sir." I turned around and said, "Pardon me?" not understanding what the heck he was on about. He then stares at me with unblinking eyes and says, "When you," points finger, "talk to me, you call me sir. Got it?" After a few seconds of bewilderment on my part, I utter, "Okay then," and proceed to continue finding the espresso's owner. It was incredibly embarrassing. Called out in a busy cafe when trying to do my job, it made me feel 2 feet tall. Joke's on him as I made sure his coffee was bitter, just like his heart. As someone who was a waitress for a very long time and also worked in retail, I can't beg people enough to say something when you see a customer acting like a total D-bag to an employee. The employee can't do anything without risking his or her job, but you have the power to put jerks like this in their place, and the employee will most likely be forever grateful. Also, real-life karma. While I agree that it's probably the right thing to do, I'd say that it's one heck of a gamble for the person doing it. Either you're correct and it really is just some coward who gets a kick out of screaming at teens and service people and who backs down immediately, or you get one of the genuine tire-slashing psychopaths mentioned here already, and you're immediately in over your head. That said, you have my admiration if you do stand up to these jerks. While working as a manager at a movie theater, I had someone call in because our online ticketing system was broken. We were just a little independent, so the large fees from sites like Fandango didn't work for us, and we had our own that worked okay. As stated, it was down and I was in the process of fixing it, but it would take some time. I tell the gentleman that he can always come into the box office and buy the tickets and save himself $1 doing so. This, of course, is incredibly insulting somehow. He lives 30 minutes away and he's worth $200 an hour, and he wants us to fix the site now. It continues for some time, but the third time he decided to mention his salary, I elected to have the call drop and the phone lines go down for a little while. I have 2 stories. First, one was just about a perfectly healthy 65-year-old who decided to deprive a mother and her severely mentally handicapped child from parking in a handicap space. He went on to just scoff and walk away when she called him out on it. No justice was done, sadly. But I used to have this other woman come into my work all the time who was just some withered-up old trophy wife with a superiority complex and a Mercedes. We have a curbside service for takeout at my job, and every frickin' Friday night, the absolute busiest day of the week at any restaurant, especially at mine where takeout usually does something close to $2 to $3 grand on busy nights, she used to park in the dedicated curbside spots and dine in for nearly 2 hours. Needless to say, I've had numerous complaints from people who mean to use that spot appropriately, but we can't do anything because anytime a manager politely reminds her to stop parking there, she goes on about being a paying customer who has the right to park wherever she wants. Blah, blah, blah. Management at my work will avoid confrontation with guests whenever possible. Even I'd run into her several times and reminded her myself, but one night she parks halfway in a handicap space and screams at me to mind your own fricking business, kid. So yeah, I called security. Enjoy your $400 ticket, C-word. Nearly got a chub watching her turn over that little envelope. She doesn't come to my work anymore, and everything seems a little brighter because of it. I worked at DirecTV in the cancellations department, a grocery store for nearly 6 years, and I'm currently front desk monkey at a hospital. I've nearly mastered that awful specimen known as the irate customer. In large crowds, I find it important to set up and get right in the problem if they're picking on a quieter employee who won't defend themselves. DirecTV taught me to let them vent and let it all out, and the grocery store taught me my judging eyes. Eyes that seem to say, you just yelled at a 19-year-old because everyone bought the hot dogs you wanted before the 4th of July instead of the hour before the party like you did. You just stare at them, let them fester in their awkward silence, because what are you supposed to do? Call Nathan's Hot Dogs and order a special air flight package? At the grocery store, I had a lady screaming about how long the line was, and so as she waited for me to do something, at the top of my lungs I asked, would anyone like to satisfy this woman by letting her get in front of them? It was an honest question, albeit phrased awkwardly. But no one piped up, and there she was. I asked everyone in line if they'd lend their generosity, and not one voice chimed in. I could write a book on the crap I've dealt with in my tender young job history. I used to be a manager at a pizza shop, and we had a customer that would order the same pizza the same way 3 times a week, and always call back to complain about it. He'd always complain about the crust being too thick, but he didn't like the thin crust, and nothing we ever tried was good enough for him. We had given him a bunch of free pizzas and discounts and whatnot up to this point, trying to retain him as a customer, but he called back in a rage one night when I was the only manager there. It went a little something like this. I need to speak to a manager. I am a manager, sir. What can I do for you tonight? You're a manager? Yes, sir. No fricking wonder. I order pizza from this overpriced crap hole multiple times a week, and you always screw it up. The crust is always too thick, and you just aren't smart enough to figure out how to fix it. Yeah, sir, I'm aware of the situation. If our pizza really isn't to your liking, maybe you should consider trying something else. Or maybe you should be fired because you're absolutely freaking terrible at your job. I don't even know why they let women out of the house, and you're allowed to be a goddamn manager? You're a worthless B-word, and you can't even make a pizza right. Maybe you should go home and let men do the work. You'd probably make a better working girl than anything else. I then proceeded to very calmly tell him we'd no longer be accepting his business, and literally told him to F off. I called my general manager to let him know. They congratulated me for it, and told me he wished he could have done it himself. In short, an angry customer told me he thought I'd make a better brothel employee than a pizza shop manager. I told him to screw himself, and I was praised by my manager for it. I spent the past couple of days on a Greyhound that was going across the country, Canada, and we pulled into Quebec. The security guard spoke fluent English. I overheard a cell phone conversation, but he seemed to be a massive D-bag. People who asked him if he spoke English usually did so in French, and he responded with yes and helped them out. Then a little Asian girl who couldn't have been more than 15 came up and asked him if he spoke English. When I chatted with her later, I found out her English was pretty raw and she moved to Canada from Taiwan about 3 years ago. The security guard said no English repeatedly, and she looked distressed. She'd asked a few others, but no one had really responded, and he looked like the only person working at the terminal at that moment. The ticket counters were closed and no janitors or anything like that were around. She went around asking others, but the people who responded didn't know the answers she was looking for. She promptly started crying. I went over and helped her as best I could. When the security guy walked past, he simply laughed at her and called a friend on his phone where he spoke nothing but flawless English. What crazy stunt did you see at a sporting event that never made it to air? Watching a third-round FA Cup game midweek in the pouring rain. Boring as heck. I heard a bloody hell. I turned around to find the cameraman quickly refocusing on a large fat man wearing nothing but a large baby nappy and performing a 30-foot knee slide in the mud in front of the fans. Camera guy was laughing his head off. He turned to me and said, "Shame it won't make the highlights." I was shooting a Big Ten football game in 2011, and I saw a gentleman in the stands who appeared to be drunk. He was standing up at his seat, waving back and forth and kind of stumbling. I turned the camera onto him because I thought it was kind of funny. Then, all of a sudden, he just fell over. The people next to him jumped on him and started doing CPR. I stopped rolling immediately because it was pretty clear this guy had had a massive heart attack. The EMTs came and carried him out on a stretcher and put him on an ambulance. The worst feeling in the world was watching the ambulance just sit in the tunnel for a long time and not turning its lights on. That guy was already gone. It was freaking horrible, and I felt like a huge butthole for not realizing what was going on. It still really bothers me. I'm certified in CPR now, in part because of that experience. I'm 90% certain we caught a cheating couple at the US Open this year. They got caught off guard on camera, winning a giveaway, and they did not look happy about it, and both got real suspicious-like. Okay, so I've never done sports, but I work in corporate AV. I've seen corporate Christmas parties get completely out of hand, like women's chest on camera, fights, people doing the deed on the dance floor, and general shenanigans. I've heard mics left open while people were unaware and going to the washroom or making petty or rude remarks, but the winner was one of the first huge events my former employer did in 2002. First anniversary party celebrating the merger of 2 energy companies into one mega company. More than 2,500 people, 6 15 by 20-foot screens, 2,000 feet of P&D, 6 cameras, bands, acrobats, F&B, the works. Months of planning, a week of setup, and 3 days of teardown for one 5-hour gig. They hired acrobats from Cirque du Soleil to perform throughout the party. One of them we shall call Balloon Dancer. Balloon Dancer did a routine where she did acrobatics on a pair of ribbons suspended from a giant helium balloon 40 or so feet in the air. Balloon Dancer wore a sheer red bodysuit over a pair of shorts and a bandeau top. During her routine, the bandeau top rolled down, exposing her own impressive balloons to the crowd on 6 15 by 20-foot screens. The switcher op only noticed after about 20 seconds that she was upside down and undressed from the waist up and started calling for different camera shots, but all of the cameras were focused on the action. "I got melons on 1. Camera 2, you're live. Nope, I've got maracas on 2. Yeah, I've got balloons on 3. Camera 4, go wide. You're live." Well, that's a pretty great story, so we'll accept you going totally away from the subject of sporting events. And as you say, complete debauchery isn't unusual at corporate events. Actually, now I've realized you broke the rules in two ways, because this totally made it to air. So, American women's soccer player Mia Hamm was attending the Cincinnati Reds game. The camera zooms in on her, and she takes a huge, and I mean huge, chug of her beer. The announcer says, "Mia Hamm is in the stands tonight, reminding everyone the importance of keeping hydrated." Back in the 1990s, before they blew up the Kingdome, there was a file of compiled footage of all the people sneaking up the 300-level nosebleeds and screwing, but it was all sped up to ×3 speed. I think it made it in circles around the UW Tech undergrad community for years. The Kingdome 300 level was pretty legendary. Unless the Yankees or some other big name was in town, it was completely deserted. People got arrested for getting undressed in the restrooms and just, hanging out. When I was a kid, my dad was a camera operator for the local public access channel and would volunteer to record the Sunday sermons at our church. I often got to sit with him in the camera room and mostly watch, but sometimes help. Occasionally, he'd let me operate one of the boards to record the children's sermon, where all of the kids in the congregation would go to the front and sit on the dais, and the minister would tell them a story before they went to Sunday school. My job was to pan through the groups of kids and find the ones that were goofing off, and cut to them for a couple of seconds, then back to the group shot. The funniest one was when we caught a kid who was standing, bent over, just waving his butt in the air. Waving it at the other kids, waving it at the congregation, a few other things. It was hilarious. We figured it would be inappropriate to include that in the taping, so we didn't use it. Not on the camera, but was part of the crew. The cheerleaders formed a tunnel for the players to run through. Handheld camera was right behind one of the cheerleaders, waiting for the team. Watching it later, you could see that she was getting a little flustered because she knew the camera was there and what was coming up. Right before the players came out, all of the cheerleaders bent over as part of the routine, and the camera gets a perfect view that would make a gynecologist blush. The producer yells, "Oh frick, pull out! Pull out!" and then realizes what he said, and the whole truck loses it. I've been working with the same crew for a long time, and we practically chat through our headsets during the entire game. There have been many laugh-out-loud moments, and my director would purposely take my camera when I'd be laughing from a funny comment someone made in the headset. I'd try so hard to hold the camera still and be focused, but all you'd see is the camera shaking from hearty laughter on my part. Even the cameras that aren't on your shoulders, it's super easy to shake it when you're laughing and zoomed in on a player. Best times. I've only done a couple, and the director mostly wants all the cameras on the action on the field. However, when alcohol is involved, we see a lot of stuff happening, and directors frequently chuckle but then tell us to pan away. I'm glad you caught that, but we can't show it. Today I learned directors are the fun police. I mean, they're usually laughing, and we hold the shot long enough for other cameras to switch to the quad split or multi-view so they can see what we see before the director asks us to pan away, in case a TD accidentally slips and cuts to us live on some couple dry humping in their seats. Most sporting events have so many cameras on the field, and no quad split anyway, so it's a good chuckle between the cameraman and the control booth. Live TV directors are ultimately responsible for everything going on, including what goes to air, and they're not the same level as film and TV directors, so one or two mistakes and they just get fired. Broadcasting networks have their standards and practices as well, so they can't be too loose. Most of them are fun, but they can't be too much fun. I remember visiting a rural family that had a satellite dish when those things were rare. They got network feeds, so no commercial breaks. One of their favorite pastimes was ABC News on the weekends. Max Robinson, rest in peace, was a different man when the red light was off. During the breaks and before the show started, he'd be smoking cigarettes, yelling and swearing at the staff and scowling. Then the director would start the countdown and he'd put the ashtray away and transform into straight newsman. Unintentionally hilarious. I was a crew at the sporting event in question. I was doing the tech rehearsal for a major sport team starting in my season. We'd gone through most of the show, the flags came out, my crew dropped our staging. We all wanted to leave, I had a date to run off to. They ran all of the graphics by the Jumbotron, and we're about to strike everything, and over the radio comes, "Okay, we're going to test the doves." Everyone looks around, and out of one of the field entrances come 12 white doves. And then a shot rang out. This arena has the best acoustics in the world. This noise sounded just like a firearm. We all look up and see the announcer's window shaking, and 2 or 3 doves are falling to the ground. And then we see the culprit. Some hawks who make their home in the area were taking a well-deserved meal for the show. Not one of those doves made it out that day. And for the next hour or so, the cameramen at the arena were following the hawks around as they killed and ate the poor doves. It was fascinating to see the birds pick up and fly hide the birds so they could eat in peace. Also, at the end of the day, the doves were cut from the opening ceremonies. Not sports, I worked at a regional station. News broadcast with a female guest, no undies and short skirt. Nobody noticed until the producer mentioned she had nice legs, tried to get them in shot, followed by an, "Oh, frick, scrap that." We broadcasted lady parts for less than 10 frames and got hundreds of complaints. It still makes me laugh. And those wondering how she reacted, nobody ever commented on it with her. The interview was finished, she left through the control room and people said, "Bye." And when she was out of eyesight, the producer had a rant and everyone else just couldn't control themselves laughing. When the host came out, she didn't have a clue. The look on her face was priceless. Back in the 80s, we had a VCR tape that was put together by the crews that worked the sporting events back in the day. My dad's best friend was an engineer that did that sort of work. There were people screwing, players running across the field with giant marital aids, undressed people, people going to town with their mouths on others with their pants down, shirtless girls on the infield at races, a drunk buck-wild dude running and jumping in the mud in the infield like a big pig, and more doing of the deed than you've seen anywhere else. There was depravity I hadn't seen at that point in my life. I wish we still had that tape. Not a cameraman, but I was at a Nebraska game a few years back, and they were getting shots of the crowd on a jumbo screen at one point. They get a nice shot of a guy holding up a big sign saying, "Go Black Shirts," or something to that effect. Within seconds of him realizing he's on camera, he lets that sign drop, and right behind that one there's another sign with, "F her right in the hoo-ha," written larger than life on it. You've never seen a camera pan away faster in your life. Everyone in my section looked at each other for a few seconds, asking ourselves, did we just see that? You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. One of the best signs I ever saw was when they were scanning the crowd and there was a guy holding a sign that says, "You can't spell the word for the male reproductive organ without ESPN. They cut away real quick, but I laughed for a while on that one. Well, now every time the narrator sees a male eggplant, he's going to think of an American sports broadcaster. And I don't know what to think of that. It's not positive or negative, just sort of an annoying, unnecessary change in my life that will amount to nothing. I work for an AV company, and one of the things some of my coworkers do is create bingo cards based off our predictions and the theme of the event. In order to get the bingo space, they have to be captured on camera live on the big screen, and we have to pan away from it. Our most frequent occurrences are girls flashing the camera when they see themselves on the big screens, chubby men who also flash the camera, gay men in Daisy Dukes who jump and jostle themselves out of their shorts, and kiss cam couples that get handsy, and catching unsuspecting people digging for gold like their lives depended on it. I used to do camera work and the big sound dishes you see on the football sidelines, aka the salad bowls. Several sound sources would be merged together to get the collision of sounds, grunts, quarterback hikes, and stuff like that. What we got to hear, but not broadcasted, was the awesome trash talk between the players, including insults against mums, sisters, and girlfriends. I'm not a camera operator, but I had all of the feeds from the cameras that you would have in the truck while doing live streaming for a bunch of major events. NFL football games pretty much always featured a couple of fistfights and usually some flashing. FIFA had tons of undressed people pretty much all of the time. Honestly, the sheer amount of au naturel human beings and the fights and stuff just became routine really fast. A funny one that's sort of in the spirit of these other answers was listening to Chris Berman and some other announcer, who I can't remember, while watching the feed of some guy taking a pee on the golf course that a camera was just holding on. They laughed for a long while, and then it just got weird. The guy was taking an epic whiz. I mean, Tom Hanks in a league of his own kind of epic. Berman went from thinking it was hilarious to this can't really be happening, and back to it being hilarious because it just went on for so long. And to top it off, not only was this guy completely hammered at something like 9:30 in the morning, no judgment, I've been there, but also totally out in the open. I mean making no attempt to hide at all. People were walking past him and either just pretending it wasn't happening or sort of scurrying past him. And it was a major event. I can't remember which one, but it was a big deal like the Masters or one of the other majors for sure. A less funny one, but one that I'll never forget, is the Red Bull Stratus jump. We had all the telemetry from the suit as well as the feed, and when he went into that flat spin, there was a good 10 seconds where we thought he was dead. Not like going to be dead, but actually dead, because we lost all telemetry. It came back before we pulled the plug on the stream, and obviously he made it, but that was a tense 10 seconds, and the kind of 10 seconds that feels like an hour. Oh, and then this one that seemed like nothing but was then devastating. We were doing the Winter Olympics, the year that poor guy on the luge crashed and actually did die, but that one actually went to air. It was pulled from every replay later, and obviously no one knew how bad it was at the time, but it was pretty crazy for a while. In short, drunk people doing drunk people things, near death, and actual death. When I was younger, we had one of those giant satellite dishes. During commercial breaks, the feed would continue, and the cameramen would scan the stands for hot women. I'm a Toronto kid. Our baseball team, the Blue Jays, play a venue called the Sky Dome, now the Rogers Centre. Ugh. And one of the perks of the stadium is that it contains a hotel. If you book a room, some of the room's windows look out over the field. Anyway, the cameramen used to pan along the hotel windows occasionally, either live to air or just in the stadium itself on the Jumbotron. Until one time, a couple was having very intense and spirited adult fun against the hotel window, and that was the last time the cameramen shot footage of the hotel rooms. I have a few stories to share. Back in 2004, I worked for the Denver Broncos as a sideline video journalist, with my video airing on the NFL Network and denverbroncos.com. Being from Denver, it was a dream come true. I had a lot of video that was great but would never get aired. Everything from overly enthusiastic Raiders fans shouting obscenities at and brawling with each other while tailgating, to a Chiefs fan flashing me in the parking lot. A lot happens at NFL games, and drunk people do some very unexpected things when you point cameras at them. My two favorite stories weren't even from when we had the camera rolling, however. In one of our preseason games, we played Buffalo in Buffalo. I was new to the team and still a bit starstruck myself. I was on field decked out in Broncos gear, team polo, hat and stuff like that. Before the game started, just standing on the sideline and enjoying watching the team warm up, two young Broncos fans, maybe 6 or 7, caught my eye and started frantically waving me over to them. I smiled and walked over and was tickled when they asked me for my autograph. I asked if they knew who I was and they said, no, of course not, but they didn't care. They just wanted someone's autograph. I laughed and signed their ticket stubs. And to this day it makes me giggle thinking that someone out there has my autograph and very likely a silly childhood memory. And my second favorite memory was a bit more scandalous. We were in San Diego playing the Chargers. And once again I was down on the field pre-game. This was the year that SoCal native Ruben Drowns was tearing up the league, and we had a sizable fan base turn out. A smoking hot blonde in the front row caught my eye, winked at me and beckoned me to come over. Obviously, I went without hesitation. "Hi," she said with a sensual grin. "Do you know Ruben? Do you think you could get him to sign something for me?" I knew him well enough to ask if he was up for it, but in pre-game it was hit or miss whether he would. "I can try," I said. "What do you want signed?" And she handed me a pair of white, stringy undies with a Broncos logo on them. They were still warm. With a laugh, I handed them back and said, "I'll ask." I walked over to where he was standing and pointed at the woman before telling him about the request. He laughed, gave her a huge wave and a smile, before telling me, "Hell no, man." I work with a marathon company doing timing. We have photographers on course every few miles or so. The photographers turn on their SD cards at the end of the day with all of the pictures on them. Then the several tens of thousands of pictures are automatically sorted by participants. The software reads the participant number on the bibs, then assigns it to that participant. No human is curating the photos, which can occasionally lead to problems. Anyway, we got an email once from a man who was unhappy because his member was hanging out of his shorts. It's also semi-common for runners to lose control of their bodily functions. So every once in a while we get an email from someone asking us to remove the picture of them with crap running down their legs. I'll be forever thankful for you for the imaginary image of a keen race participant's face as they look up the photos of themselves based on their badge number and just see that they've been shown in a compromising moment on the internet for all to see. I think nearly as funny would be the people who didn't take bad photos themselves, but then they realize there's a loose sausage or a bout of diarrhea in the background or foreground of their picture. I was on camera 9 at a baseball game, which means in about 99% of all scenarios, my camera isn't getting used. All I'm doing is scanning the crowds on the opposite side for babies, fathers with their sons, happy couples, and stuff they can just cut to fill airtime between innings and stuff. Every now and again there would be a pop fly and I got to trace that over to whoever caught it, and sometimes pan to the dugout, but it was really just a crowd camera for when they hit home runs. So I'm panning through people as the pitcher is setting up his next throw, and the director goes, "Well, camera 9, get a close-up of that girl in the pink shirt." So I do, and I'm not exaggerating, saying that she has a sized 36 triple Q chest, barely covered by this pink tank top. So I get a close-up of her, and he says, "Okay, lock it down." So I do. Sat there for the next 45 minutes with nothing happening, because baseball is extremely boring to film, and got paid to look at the gargantuan pear on this woman. Ended up getting bought back because the director liked my work so much. Ugh, dude, that's so gross. I know you were told to do that, but it seems incredibly objectifying and violating. Also, I'd bet money that your gross director got way too much enjoyment from that footage, if you know what I mean. Not 100% of the question, but I worked at a major news outlet that had done a story that a small group of people didn't like, so we had maybe 30 people outside protesting. They'd crudely made signs on sticks and were kind of doing a circle like you see union protesters doing. One of the cameramen was filming it from where we were, outside of a second-floor window. One guy seemed to be walking slower than the rest and had trouble keeping the nicely spaced circle, and people kind of bunched up naturally around him. Out of nowhere, the guy just projectile chucks up, hitting a few other protesters, and everyone is a mixture of grossed out and confused. Suddenly the circle of protesters breaks up and people are running in every direction, and 2 minutes later, no more protest. A pile of throw-up is the only evidence that anyone was ever there. We watched that video over and over. The editing team slowed it down, put it to music and stuff. Never laughed so much in my life. Best time in an otherwise stressful job. I used to be cameraman for a big-time sports event, and one time I saw the hot dog selling guy pull out a hot dog and put it in his pants so it looked like he had a real big-time sausage. I mean, go to any Bills game in Buffalo and you'll probably see about as crazy as it gets. Bills fan here, can confirm. The first Major League Baseball game I went to had something like this happen. I was about 16 and went with a bunch of buddies. We got in right before the game was starting, and the cameraman was scanning the crowd and showing it on the Jumbotron. The camera settled on this happy bald man who smiled sweetly at the camera, paused, then held up the shocker. The camera cut immediately away. It was hilarious to us 16-year-olds. I was the digital archivist for an NHL franchise. Part of my job was to log footage of the game, tag clips of big goals and hits and stuff. I was fast-forwarding through the in-house feed when I noticed a hit. A big hit. I mean an almighty drop-the-shoulder body check right in front of the crease. The unusual thing? It was during the intermission. The team mascot, a 40-year-old man, was the perpetrator, and the victim, a 6-year-old girl. What's the most unhinged thing you've caught on surveillance footage? I had a game camera out once, and a neighbor who'd just walk through my property any time. I didn't care, the place is just pretty big and there's no back fence. But I kept having sheep go missing, so I set out a camera. The camera caught my neighbor walking by, and then like 30 seconds later, a frickin' mountain lion walked by it, stalking him. It apparently never attacked as he was fine, but he had no idea how close he was to that thing. I used to work overnights at a hotel and would monitor the security cameras. They'd detect motion, and a little indicator would blink when motion was, well, detected. Anyways, it always gave me the creeps when I'd hear the elevator ding. I'd run out to the lobby to greet the guest, to make sure they didn't need something or whatever, and nobody would get off the elevator. I'd watch the tapes and see the motion indicator blinking on a floor, then see the elevator open on that floor, then see the elevator open on the ground floor and the motion indicator blink on the camera down the hall. It gave me the heebie-jeebies. Also, one time I was in my office in the middle of the night, and it sounded like somebody banged on the door with the side of their fist. Just one single slam. You can see me reacting to it on the video. My head whipped around to face the door where the sound came from, then immediately whipped around to stare at the camera to see who the frick was outside my door. There was nobody there, and none of the motion sensors had picked up anything. Not fun finishing the rest of that shift. I was house-sitting in a huge house and set up a canary camera near my bedroom. I had an uneasy feeling that somebody else was in the house with me, so I set up the camera just to make sure nobody came near my room. In the middle of the night, somebody approached it from behind and turned it so that it faced a blank wall. Then a few minutes later, it turned it back the way it was. It tripped the canary and I got a notification on my phone. I saw it and searched the house thoroughly the next morning and I never found anything. Needless to say, I slept with my door locked the rest of my time there. I have a home security system with a camera that watches the living room. I saw my cat and my dog both sitting in the dog's bed. The cat frickin' hates the dog. I think she was possessed. Theirs is a forbidden love. Goddamn pets. I mean, that is so funny because your life would objectively be better and happier if your pets got along whenever you were home. Like them pretending to hate each other with you around serves no purpose other than stressing out their owners. I blame the cat. I worked in a maximum security prison for a while. I was assigned to central control one night, which is where the camera screens were. One of the cameras was for the classifications room. I glanced at it and there was an inmate in there. It was super odd because it was 2 a.m. and nobody was supposed to be in there. Everyone that had keys to that room went home at 5. Anyway, so this inmate was just sitting in there doing nothing. I got the sergeant's attention and told him somebody was in there, and I gave him the spare key to the room. He went to go check it out with a couple of other people, but by the time he got there, the room was empty. They searched for like 15 minutes, but there was definitely nobody in there. I used to have an apartment pretty close to my office. The office building was kind of in a business district, but it was also kind of off on its own relative to the city's commercial district footprint. I sold the apartment, and before moving into my new home, I left my bicycle chained to the building's bike rack. It was only going to be there for a few days in that no man's land before I was finally able to move it to the new place. Anyway, one day in the middle of the week, I came into the office, walked past the bike rack, and noticed that it was completely empty. The building has a bunch of security cameras, and one more or less is facing the bike rack since it's adjacent to the front entryway. I sat and watched the security tape with the IT guy. We're watching, we see everyone leave the office the night before, see the bike, keep watching, and then all of a sudden, poof, the bike is gone. We slowed the tape down, and it seemed like when you're watching digital cable or satellite and the image gets garbled. Literally, it was bike there, then poof, gone. In the tape's timestamp, it literally happened in 1 second. I assume my bike got taken to the upside down. Did the IT guy edit the surveillance footage to make it look like his bike straight up disappeared? The ultimate grift. I work in security. During the weekdays, I'm doing parking, while weekends I'm at the desk solo. I'll always remember this one Saturday. It was the second shift ever working the weekend, and I was watching the cameras when this one guy came to the side door. He looked around inside, and just before I could activate the speaker to let him know he was on private property, he looked directly at the camera and stared what felt like a minute. When I took my hand away from the button, he started to walk away. I ran to the side door to see if I could see where the heck he was walking, and he was just gone. The only thing in that direction was more frickin' wall. So, to this day, whenever I'm watching the cameras, I'm waiting for this guy. This happened a few years before I started working at my current job. The elevators in my building go down to the first and second basement. Late one night, one of our security guards spotted a group of people heading into the elevator at level 4. He thinks it's curious because nobody's supposed to be in the building after midnight, so he keeps a close watch on all the lobby cameras to see which floor the group alights at. The doors open at basement 2, but nobody comes out. The second guard scurries down to the elevator doors while the first keeps his eyes on the cameras to make sure no one has left. When the second guard gets to the basement elevator, he looks puzzled and searches around. He comes back to the guard station to confirm that it is indeed empty. Putting the building on lockdown, the 2 guards spend the rest of the night combing the building together, but they were unable to find anyone or anything. They decided to call the police, who reviewed the footage and see the same thing. In the end, the sighting was still unexplained, but my workplace decided to stop being cheap and installed security cameras in the elevators as well. I edited together the footage from the security cameras outside Pulse before, during, and after the tragedy there. Though there were many sad or disturbing things to be seen, the strange one was a wounded man that appeared out of nowhere. He waved his hands for help, and the cops came over and carried him to safety. I tried numerous times to rewind to find out where he'd come from, but he was just there, or he wasn't. He didn't crawl to where he'd gotten, he kind of just appeared there. He looked like he made it out okay at least. I used to work at a place which was required to be manned 24 hours a day. The reason being is that I handled sensitive documents and files, and if somebody needed this information in the middle of the night, I'd have to fetch it for them or confirm that I had it. Anyways, security was kinda tight. Bars on the windows, multiple locked doors to get to where I was. They'd give me work to do during the night, but underestimated how quickly I could get it done. So, like most nights, I finished my work in like 30 to 45 minutes, pulled out my phone and played games and Netflix browsed and Reddit, since nobody else was in the building. So now it was getting to be the last third of my shift when all of a sudden I hear a door close. I looked at the security camera and see somebody walking down a hall towards my room. At first I thought it was just somebody that had come in, ridiculously early of course, so I turned around and waited for them to come in. But then nobody came, and the hairs started raising on the back of my neck. Now this isn't really a big building, so I figured I'd find the guy wherever he is and just start checking offices and storage rooms, but I came up empty-handed. However, I do see that a fire door has been shut. I go to try and rewind the camera, but the digital recording is password protected and I don't know that password. Anyways, the whole thing had freaked me out. The way that person was walking down the hallway like a determined walk right to where I was. So I sat with my spine tingling for the last couple of hours of my shift, and finally people started coming in. My replacement shows up and I tell her what I saw, and at this point I figured I must have imagined the whole thing. I'm told to go home, and the manager and girl who replaced me would look over the camera. After getting home, I called my manager and asked what was on the camera. So they said that the video showed the fire door closing, but then the video froze for about an hour. The next thing it records is me reopening the door. Okay, there are a lot more ghosts in this batch of stories than I would have suspected. Honestly, my money was on you people catching people doing the deed all over the place or pulling crimes, and instead we got some supernatural stuff. Way to pleasantly surprise me, Internet. Loss prevention officer here. I see crazy stuff go down all the time. One of the creepiest things I've seen was a string of toys moving on its own down an aisle. It was like a duck with the smaller ducks behind it. Of course, I had to investigate it. When I zoomed in, I was surprised to see they were real ducks. My brother-in-laws own a pub. One night, all of the alarms start going off. This is unusual because if you were breaking into a place and the alarm went off, you'd quickly grab something and run away. For all of the alarms to go off, you'd have to have a whole bunch of people running amok through the pub, or one person who just doesn't care about the alarms. Brother-in-law calls the police and races to the pub. One of the front doors has been smashed to pieces. A giant rock is laying on the floor. One of the bar areas has been disturbed. A lockbox is missing. The pub appears to be empty. He stands outside the door so that nobody else can get in. The police arrive and they do a sweep. Nothing further is found. They review the footage to find a drunk man staggering up to the door carrying a giant rock. It doesn't take a big rock to smash a glass door. The rock was bigger than a basketball. The guy holds it above his head and throws it through the glass door. He casually steps through the smashed glass. The alarm sounds, but he doesn't appear to notice or care. In no particular hurry, drunk man walks behind the bar, opens the fridge and pulls out a bottle of cider. He drinks it and leaves the bottle on the bar. He then starts looking around for money and finds a lockbox with a couple of $1,000 in it for a footy tipping competition. He puts the box on the bar, grabs a bottle of Jack Daniels before casually strolling out into the night holding the bottle and the lockbox. The police found him at the railway station. He was asleep on the bench with the money from the lockbox in his pocket. Next to him was a bin containing a broken lockbox and an empty bottle of Jack. I can only assume this criminal mastermind thought he was pulling the heist of the century in his drunken stupor. I should point out that to this day they have no idea where that giant rock came from. The pub is opposite a park which doesn't appear to have any landscaping rocks, and the nearest house would be over 150 meters away. It took 2 people to remove that rock from the crime scene. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I don't work in surveillance, but I used to work at a college and I had to review 18 hours of security footage once to see who was vandalizing some bulletin boards. It happened sometime between noon on Saturday and 8 AM on Sunday, so I had to sit there and review the footage. I watched a half a dozen couples fight, this guy off his brain on green herbs staring at the bulletin board for probably 10 minutes at 3 PM, a drunk girl in heels fall over and drag her 2 other friends down with her. They then rolled around laughing their butts off at 9 PM, a couple doing the deed in the hall at 11 PM, a guy in a chicken costume going for a stroll at 3 AM, and then some shady dude in a hood wander around and press his ear to the doors at 4 AM. About a year ago, I had cameras installed around my house, initially to catch mail thieves. One morning, after noticing my back gate ajar, I reviewed the footage from the night before. I watched as a would-be burglar at 3 a.m. pried open the gate and crept towards the living room. He suddenly stopped and started backing away when he noticed I was home and awake. I was actually just a few feet away in the living room with the blackout curtains closed. He must have spotted light peeking out the bottom of the curtains. The motion-activated lights kicked on as he simultaneously ran out the back gate and into the woods behind our yard. I was awake, transitioning to a mid-shift, and ironically I had a table full of weapons as I disassembled them for cleaning after a day at the range. It's probably good that I didn't see or hear him that night. We both would have freaked out. I used to work security at a college dorm, and I once witnessed one of the doors on a washing machine slowly open itself and then proceed to tear itself clean off the machine. I told my boss this creepy story and showed him the video, and he made me review camera footage for the rest of the night to find out who broke the washing machine, despite the fact that he watched it break itself. I believe he ended up writing up the last person to use it, even though that guy didn't do anything wrong. I'm so glad that I don't work there anymore. I used to see little crescent-shaped light orbs floating around the back dock of a nursing home that I did a little security for when I was young. First time I saw it, I thought it was a reflection of a flashlight and that somebody was screwing around behind the building. I jumped up and ran to that door, only to find out that it was pitch dark and no kind of movement of any kind was going on. The only explanation I was ever able to come up with is that it had something to do with the electrical panel energizing when the AC units would kick on. I don't know for sure, but that little theory made me feel a little better. Also around that time, the nurses found a cat that had been deboned, sprawled out on the sidewalk in front of the healthcare entrance. The paws and skull were the only hard bits left. Ugh. I have cameras on my front and back doors that send video to my phone when they detect movement. I was out of town and woke up seeing several police officers walking around my front and backyard. I called my neighbor to find out what had happened, and I found out that somebody had crashed their car through my back fence, which borders the highway. I helped a friend install a camera inside an elevator. The mall guards had a special hard drive for interesting footage. They showed us an elderly couple making out inside an elevator. It wasn't creepy because they were old, but because of how sweet Grandma and Grandpa turned into lost beasts as soon as the door closed, and then just back to sweet just before the door opened again. That elevator has seen a lot of action, gay, straight, and other, but that couple was in the top 10. I have a home security system. I left for work one morning. I walked out my back door, got in my car, and pulled out of my driveway. The moment I left the driveway, a homeless would-be burglar came out from hiding on the side of my house and tried to open my back door. When he found it locked, he reluctantly wandered off after looking around for a bit. I never would have known if it weren't for the cameras. It makes you wonder what goes on without your knowledge. And I'd like to take a moment to advocate for home security systems. Please consider purchasing one. The ability to see what goes on around your home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is absolutely priceless. My camera system aids in investigation of at least 3 petty crimes in my neighborhood per year. Hit and runs, petty larceny, stuff like that. I mean, fair sentiment I guess if you have a full-blown house with a garden. Honestly, I'm not sure how easy it is to install one in a concrete apartment like mine, or that you'd catch much useful. Add to that the fact that I record from home and I'm more likely to just awkwardly walk into the criminals on my way to the kitchen, and it's one of those things that I'll likely put off for a while. I work for a security company. We install and monitor CCTV on construction sites. One night, about 2 a.m., our response officer gets a call from the monitoring system to say that there's a guy walking around one of the buildings under construction. They describe him as tall, dressed in all black with his hood up, but they couldn't see his face because he had his back to the camera. He wasn't stealing or vandalizing, just wandering around. It's usually homeless people looking for the shelter. So the response goes to investigate. When he gets there, there's nobody around, so he asks the station to check the camera covering the way in and out of the building to see which direction the guy went. But there's nothing. He does a full patrol of the site and there's no trace of anyone. The only other way for this guy to get out was to shimmy down some scaffolding, and he could be hurt, so the response officer asks the station to do a check on all of the camera footage through the night to see if there's any sign of him leaving. There's nothing. The next day, we ask the station to send over the stills from when they initially picked the intruder up, and he's not on any of them, just footage of our response officer walking around. We were pretty freaked out talking about it in the office, and it was laughed off as the monitoring officer being sleepy and seeing things. Except the cameras we have use infrared beams, and they only alert the monitoring station when somebody breaks those beams. I used to work doing part-time surveillance work for an art gallery. I went in horribly sick one day because I worked on a contract and I had to meet a quota for so many hours. Otherwise, I'd have to make it up elsewhere, which was borderline impossible for me because I only had free time on weekends when they were closed. So here I am with a fever and a trash can, dripping sweat and staring at these screens, when all of a sudden, on the lower gallery, I see this black, oozing mass creeping across the floor. It just kinda slithered across the brick, up the wall, pooled into a perfect circle in the middle of the room, and then it stood up into this weird, elongated shadow person with spindly arms and no eyes. It looked up at the camera, then very rapidly melted back into the floor and bolted towards the hallway that led to my desk. I screamed bloody murder, and then I threw up. Also, no, that thing wasn't really there. I was just way sicker than I thought. It was a fever hallucination. My boss came in and sent me home shortly after she came to see if I'd died, and I actually still use that weird gangly thing my brain came up with as a motif in some of my art. I'm a personal banker now, but at the time this story took place, I was an administrative assistant for a banking executive. The office I worked at was our regional headquarters, so there were a lot of different departments around. One such department was manned by a friend of mine who I would often take breaks with. One day I went into the basement and towards his cubicle where he was reviewing robbery footage of a local branch. This was around Halloween, and these crooks had watched way too much TV before coming up with their plan. If you know anything about bank robberies, there's hardly ever a takeover situation. These guys barged into the branch wearing Scream Halloween masks and capes. A customer stood up from the chair he was sitting in and got pistol whipped by one robber, while the other robber hopped the teller counter and pointed his piece at the teller. This poor teller was only on his second day and was still in training. He tried to open the drawer and it was locked. He didn't have the keys. He got pistol whipped too and fell to the ground. I don't remember exactly how much they got away with, but it wasn't much. Something about watching all of that take place in silence and in black and white on my friend's computer really creeped me out. They were caught a few hours later. They parked the getaway car right in front of their apartment and were counting money with the curtains open. Idiots. A man absolutely destroying his meat in the middle of an empty parking lot. I used to manage a retail swimming pool store, and we had a nice koi pond in the side yard. I chiefly cared for it, feeding the fish and cleaning out the leaves and filter and stuff, so I named all of the fish and grew to care about them. Then one day I was walking through the side yard to get to the back office when I noticed there were no fish in the pond. It's not a big pond, maybe a foot or two at its deepest and 7 feet long. It's not like they're all hiding. At first I thought somebody had hopped the fence and stolen the fish. Koi are expensive after all. So I reviewed the security footage from the night before to try and catch the cretin who did that, and at 6 a.m. I caught him. A giant heron with a 6-foot wingspan came down and helped himself to some lox for breakfast. Man, I felt sad. Luckily, one of the traumatized survivors appeared. He came out of some hiding hole in the wall. He was named Subway because he was about a foot long. We bought more fish to keep him company, and I made a rock cove covering over half the pond so that they could flee in case that damn heron came back. When I worked at Sears in high school, there was a theft in my department, and the LP team pulled us into their surveillance room to interview us. While they were asking me questions, I kept being distracted by all the monitors. Right above the guy asking me questions, I saw a small TV that had 16 smaller screens, and I realized the cameras were in the dressing rooms. I didn't see anyone in there at the time, and the guy interviewing me saw me looking. He turned to the console and turned that monitor off real quick. Super creepy, if you ask me. In short, Sears has cameras in their dressing rooms. How did a student completely tank their own college application? The amount of students who glue Rice to their applications to Rice University is too damn high. My favorite email I ever received was a reply to an admission where all the kids said was, "Hey, we made it!" I printed that out from my desk for sure. Graduate school admissions. Our application requires 4 separate essays. This student wrote all 4 as a long, drawn-out love letter to one of our faculty members. The faculty member wasn't taking new students into the lab and had never met or talked to the prospective student. The student had taken all of the info for her love letters from his website, in addition to providing a list of his publications, also from his website, that she had read. I walked away from reading her application with 0 sense of who she was, but having learned a great deal about the faculty member. We had an applicant send in a book they wrote and published themselves. It was difficult for us to really read it because for some reason the book really stank. We just put it in their file and shut the door.
Like, stank as in literally smelled bad?
Yeah, it was awful. The book itself seemed fine, but the odor made it really difficult to read. I am a college soccer coach. I was at a college recruitment event. At these events, they hand out profile booklets. In the section of interesting facts, one of the players' bios had an ad for a car that he was selling. I know a college admissions person, and one time they told me that a student wrote down that they can distinguish bra cup sizes by a simple glance at a woman. They were not impressed. Whitewater farting. He meant whitewater rafting. Someone wrote a lovely and extensive essay on how they wanted to go to Vanderbilt for an application to American in DC. My high school counselor told us about a kid who did something similar. He sent his essays to the wrong schools, but when he realized what he had done, he sent them both photos of himself with his foot in his mouth, and they both accepted him. Honestly, you have nothing to lose at that point. You're definitely not getting in if you just leave it be, so why not just admit that you wrote 2 personalized letters that went in the wrong envelope each? Not everyone would go with the humorous angle, but it worked with this guy. My college proudly advertised that in my class we had an Oreo stacking champion. Never figured out who it was after 4 years. At a law school I was considering attending, the admissions people told the story of a woman who had sent a shoe in with her application, along with a note that said, "Now I have a foot in the door." I once had an applicant come through who put in that their preferred name was the Turtle on their college application. An applicant literally wrote something along the lines of, "Please don't accept me, I don't want to go to your school," in the addendum section of our application because his parents forced him to apply. Another time, an applicant submitted an essay composed of Japanese characters that when put through Google Translate turned out to be a loosely translated version of Cat in the Hat. One of ours wrote that they were a people person because they had multiple personalities. I wrote a 750-word admission essay describing the smell of baked potatoes. Maybe not what they had in mind, but I got accepted and I went on to attend that university. The worst CV I ever saw as part of an application to a graduate program was a barely intelligible, unformatted mess that included such bits of information as, "She likes to spend her free time reading and her favorite book is 50 Shade Grey. Why waste time say lot word when few word do trick?" I won't say how I know this person, but he answered an essay question asking what he'd do if he had $100 by explaining that he'd go to the local playground where homeless people congregated and host a mini Olympics where the homeless could compete for the 150 burgers he purchased with the money. The idea was to feed them, but also do a study in human behaviors. This was for John Hopkins, and I'm pretty sure they weren't pleased with his answer. And to answer some repeated questions, it's not that $100 was a lot of money. It was more that JH wanted to see how you'd spend a small amount of money for the greatest effect. Also, the burgers were that cheap because at the time, BK was having a special on Tuesdays. The essay went into all the pricing to demonstrate frugality. And no, this person, did not get in. I'm sure the essay is on their wall of shame now. I'm not an admissions officer, but a couple of years ago, a girl sent in an application to my university in larger than normal packaging. Somebody in the admissions office decided it was suspicious looking and might be a bomb. A section of campus got shut down, and Bomb Squad got to use their fancy toys to figure out it was just a regular application that the girl had attached lights to so that her app would stand out.
But did she get accepted?
No, she bombed the interview. That they were dead. The mom was still in denial and sent out a ton of applications. When I was young, my grandfather often took me out hunting for peasants. He meant pheasants. And to be fair, this was a Princeton application, so for all we know he might have also hunted the poor. I heard this one from a rather unpleasant admissions officer there. Maybe she stole the story from somewhere to scare high school seniors everywhere.
Sounds like someone I had class with in high school who had wealthy lawyer parents. He called everybody peasants and ended up getting arrested for posting online about his plan to shoot up our school. He escaped severe legal punishments because of said wealthy lawyer parents. When I applied to medical school, one of the application essays had a prompt that asked us what we'd do if we didn't get into medical school. I wrote that I'd go to law school and become a lawyer specializing in prosecuting medical malpractice. I ended up getting an interview and had a good laugh about it with one of the interviewers. I did not get into that medical school. Law school admissions.
We had a woman apply multiple times, but there was clearly something not mentally right with her. Our essay topic was basically, why this law school? She started the essay, verbatim minus this name omission. Who am I? I am Jane Doe. I want to go to law school and marry lawyer. She also said that she wanted to go to law school to work for her boss, Donald Trump/Barack Obama. It was clearly a recycled essay and she had missed some of the updates. She switched out the names. She also wrote about how she cured cancer, discovered how to regenerate amputated limbs with stem cells, and reversed grey hair back to its original color. She'd also routinely send handwritten addendums to her application with more of her accomplishments to be added to her file. Her letters of recommendation included one from her pastor that said she used to regularly attend his church, but she's no longer following the teachings of the church, so he can't recommend her for anything in good conscience. Then there was a letter from her therapist who said with a large amount of one-on-one assistance, she may be able to complete a law school level course, and the generic form letter responses you get when you write a letter to the president. She had a 132 LSAT score, the lowest I've ever seen, so we never actually had to consider her, but I was actually pretty nervous she'd show up eventually. Campus police knew who she was and got copies of all of her letters. I talked to another admissions counselor at a school across the country, and she was doing the same thing to their office as well. I should clarify that this is in no means meant to pick on someone with a mental illness. I only worked in admissions temporarily, and actually I now work in the mental health field. I know she's sick, and from the letter her therapist sent in, I think he really cares about her well-being, so I'm hoping she gets the help she needs and deserves. She said some off-the-wall things, and it was ridiculous to see it in the setting I saw it in. I think it would be highly unethical to allow someone like this into law school. The stress of law school can break some emotionally stable people, so it would be cruel to subject her to that stress. It would also be unethical to allow her to take on a mountain of debt with no chance of graduating or passing the bar. One of my high school teachers used to read a newsletter that highlighted these types of things. My favorite one was that for one of the essays, the applicant was asked, "Ask yourself a question and then answer it." And the student's response, "Do you play the tuba?" "No." And he got accepted.
Today I learned I worked too hard on my admissions essays.
You're telling me. Apparently you're in if you can make a good one-liner or demonstrate that your parents are wealthy. Also, are these a thing in the UK as well as the States? Because all of the universities I've attended or worked at in my life required no such personal touches. I feel compelled to tell this story, even though it's slightly off-topic. I intern in the admissions office at a decently prestigious private California university, and I overhear the counselors making decisions. They regularly shout stats across the office to get other people's input on whether or not to accept or deny applicants. There was one kid who was right on the edge of what we normally accept, the lower end of the spectrum. My boss shouted out his stats and got mixed responses. Then she said the infamous phrase I'll never forget. "But guys, I Zillowed his house. It's $4 million in Los Angeles." And they frickin' let him in. That was the determining factor for this kid's college career. I'll never forget sitting there in horror listening to them joke about his wealth. I have so little respect for college admissions, at least at my school, and the administration after hearing that. A high school classmate of mine was forced to apply in-state by his parents. He'd already been accepted out of state for early admissions. So naturally, he took his beautifully written essays, put them through Google Translate a couple of times, and then submitted the result. He got waitlisted. He'd already been accepted into his dream out-of-state school, and parents had agreed to pay for it if I recall correctly, so not really being a butthead there. Also, the in-state school is quite prestigious, I think top 30, so we were all mildly shocked and amused to hear that he had been waitlisted. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My wife was an admissions counselor for a small, well-known Bible college in downtown Chicago. She got a ton of crazy applications. Quite a few came from people proclaiming things like, "I'm the prophet Robert and I've been given a prophecy and written them down. I need this degree to get this added to the Bible." One particular time she was at work and it was towards the end of the day, so most had already gone home. Well, they had a walk-in prospective student come to the office and want to meet with an admissions counselor. My wife was the only one left for the day, so she went into a fairly small conference room to speak about any questions he might have about the school and how to go about the application process. This man was a middle-aged male who didn't look out of the ordinary. About 10 minutes into their meeting, he then started slowly going off the rails about his testimony, his life story, even though my wife never asked for it. He starts talking about how God had been giving him visions for years of things he needed to accomplish while on Earth. Apparently, a small Bible degree was one of the small list of things needed. My wife then sees through the window on the door behind the man a few public safety officers come in and speaking to the secretary. They then interrupt their meeting and escort the man off campus. Before he left a big pile of handwritten papers that were new books of the Bible that needed to be added. Apparently, he was on their red flag list because he'd done this many times before for about 20 years, including making extreme death threats to their counselors for not letting him into the school and had once even attacked a student employee. This is one of a long list of crazies that contact her. She has a folder of crazy emails that were too hilarious to delete from this earth. In short, many prophets coming in proclaiming to be on a mission from God to deliver new books of the Bible to my wife. I had a friend who responded to the question, "Tell us about yourself," by drawing himself using lines and dashes on the computer and labeling parts of his face. He was accepted. Every time this question comes up, there's always people complaining about kids who've something really petty for their hardship they overcame essay. But also, they complain when kids write those essays about how they've never really had a hardship to overcome. Yeah, that essay kind of screws over people who've had a decent life, as well as screwing people who've had a traumatic experience, and writing a whole thing about it would trigger PTSD. Also, screwing over people who've overcome a real hardship but want to keep their private life private. Honestly, it really shouldn't be a prompt. For their GPA, they put 95. One student listed their high school as I don't know. One student listed their intended major as teaching and their minor in principal. I asked one person how to spell their name, and they had to ask their mother how to spell it. Multiple people have actually tried listing their IQ as a reason for admittance. If you get to write your own personal essay, do not write "why" as the title of the essay, and the entire essay be "why not?" Maybe not too ridiculous, but those stuck with me. I'm sure that last person was super smug thinking their essay was genius. My brother applied to a religious private school, and one prompt was, "In what way has God encouraged you to pursue law?" And his answer was not applicable. He got in and used the scholarship to negotiate funding at the schools he wanted to go to. I got into a great university, and about a year later, a guy from my hometown messaged me asking if I could look over his application form. Now, I was over the moon because I was really proud of this guy for wanting to further himself, because I'd been worried he'd fall into our town's trap of poverty and dying young. Now, I'm not saying I rewrote his application, but if what he gave me was the alphabet, then I gave him back the entire damn works of Shakespeare. Some highlights include, when prompted to talk about what led him to seek out university qualifications, he answered something along the lines of, and this is grammatically exactly the same way he explained it, "My mate went and seemed like she had fun. I wanted to have fun but also get smarter." When asked to talk about any prior work experience or volunteering, he mentioned his time in McDonald's. It's not bad, still a job, but he didn't go into much depth besides that. He also said the time when he was younger and had to do community service for something. And when you get to the part of the application where it asks you why you want to attend that university, he literally said something along the lines of, "Oh, Google said it was good." Now, obviously, I couldn't rewrite it perfectly, because he'd get to the interview and they'd be able to tell somebody else had done all the work for him, but I tidied it up for him and gave him a pep talk for the interview, and clearly they saw that he was a great guy just looking to further himself, and he got in. At the part of the essay where they wrote, "What else would you like us to know?" I wrote about the birthday party I threw for my dog. At the end of that section I put, "If I were an admissions officer, I'd feel that this is relevant to the application." I was shockingly accepted. What? I mean, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with celebrating your poochie, but why did you put that? And you seem to have realized it was bonkers because you've answered this question with it. Here, I'm going to assume it was a tiny little extra short answer at the end after all of the actually relevant stuff. Well done anyway, I guess. About how she discovered her passion for science through a summer research internship where she studied microbiota swabbed from her butthole. My sister had to write an essay for a super Christian college she was applying to, and she wrote about the struggles she faced being atheist, and got accepted. That actually sounds legit. Most Christians are actually decent people who wouldn't think being an atheist disqualifies you from being in their school.
A well-written essay on a topic like this ticks a lot of general college application boxes, like dealing with hardship or diversity and stuff, and would likely be well received in most places. I'm out of the business now. I got a real job, but I was the transfers guy in addition to regular freshmen, and there are two cases that stick with me. The first was a phone call. A mum called in telling us her daughter should be let in with a 2.4. I was candid with her and told her it wasn't going to happen. She was well below our requirement. The mum started weeping. I mean, real honest weeping. I tried to calm her down some and asked her what it was all about. Parents generally just get angry. They don't give you the reaction that this woman gave me. She tells me she just found out she has late-stage brain cancer and she doesn't have anywhere for her daughter. And she hasn't told her yet. She had about 3 months. So basically, just enough time to help her daughter move in for freshman move-in day. I had her send in some documents from her doctor and took it to the director, and he made a special exception. We also made sure the girl had housing. It felt good to make a difference. The second case was a transfer who had a cumulative GPA of 1.78. I went to snap the denial off on that one before I saw the case had a pile of transcripts that hadn't been viewed. I popped up his STAR military transcript, and it looked like he'd joined the Navy after flunking out of community college. There was boot camp, then buds within 3 months, then team lead, then pages and pages of blacked out lines. I made the argument to the director that the guy who had 10 pages of Spec Ops leadership was in no way in heck going to flunk a college class, and that his transcripts be ignored and that he was treated as a fresh applicant. The director agreed, and I got a call from Africa on a satellite phone the next day saying thank you. The guy showed up a couple of weeks later to thank me in person and shake my hand. I had a student apply for a master's program, but the student didn't have a college degree. When I applied to college, the essay question was something like, "What is your favorite place?" I said the bathroom and spent the whole essay talking about how I loved going number 2. Did they accept that load of crap?
Yeah, they also gave me a scholarship. I'm a decent writer, so it probably wasn't a bad essay, just wasn't what they were looking for. My college counselor in high school used to be an admissions person at an Ivy. She showed us the best essay she'd ever read as an example of ours. The essay was the kid's first time trying alcohol. He was a straight-A student spending a summer in Spain with a host family. They woke him up to take tequila shots for a cultural festival, and he'd never drank before because grades were everything. His essay was about how he drank to be nice to his host family and realized there is way more to life than just school and tunnel vision. She said that almost every school he applied to contacted his high school to say it was the best one they'd ever read, and he got into 3 Ivy Leagues. Yeah, either he was lying or he was definitely an F in geography. We do not do tequila shots for cultural festivals in Spain. That would be Mexico, if any. In Spain, we have a plethora of regional alcoholic beverages, none of them is tequila, which is made with agave that doesn't grow naturally in Spain. I forced my best friend to apply to a college he wasn't super interested in where I was applying. There was a section of the application where you describe your hobbies and past experience. He wrote walking as his first one with 17 years of experience and gravity as his employer. He got in. I read through a large number of these before realizing that we don't do this process in Australia as far as I know. I applied to Sarah Lawrence with my Why Our College essay being about how I'd heard about them from the Princess Diaries books. I got accepted. I received an 8-page diatribe PhD application, of which page 5 contained the sentence, "But enough about myself," finally culminating in this paragraph. I have aspirations to allow my research to impact the world, helping to eradicate poverty, neglect, health conditions, and possibly even on a global scale, with this PhD being the start of my life's work. If I were to aim big, I'd like to think that I could go on to do amazing and wonderful things. I do not aspire for the accolades, but feel if I work hard enough, I could achieve literally anything. Even a Nobel Peace Prize could be on the cards if I were allowed to just give my best. My dream is to be able to travel the world and teach people the importance of understanding a community as a whole. Teach people how to put aside differences and grow as one united worldwide community, and of course, change the world for the better. I just need to have the opportunity to get it started. You skeptic, this project sounds promising. What is it about? Ideally, I'd like to keep the project open and not focused on one specific geographical area, but feel I could definitely focus a lot of my knowledge on slums and areas with real problems with poverty and highlight issues around elitism versus extreme poverty. I'd focus on politics, religion, education, materialism, consumerism, and cultural norms, with the attempts of showing how issues within these can stop a community fully flourishing. I really do feel that this project could turn into a physical project and move forward with my own aspirations. I think I could focus more on the slums if you feel like this is an area that the university will support. I would be more than willing to visit various areas that have slums and try to learn about the problems the people face and how they'd want it to change. This man just wanted to create a new blueprint for society. I wrote my essay about procrastinating and getting distracted. I got accepted. I mean, at least you submitted it. For a specialized master's program working with children. While I have little experience with children, I believe my life experiences can help teach them, including my stint in prison and a brief stay in the mental hospital. When did your doctor completely and utterly roast you? My female doctor, now retired, once told me I had great birthing hips. I'm a male. When I was in middle school until 10th grade, I'd get violent nausea anytime I got hungry. It felt like my stomach was on fire, and I'd miss a lot of school from feeling like crap, although I was a good student and wasn't falling behind in any way. She agreed to take me to a gastroenterologist to be checked out. Before agreeing to do an endoscopy, the gastro accused me of exaggerating because I was a teen girl, and that's apparently just what young women do. He suggested I was just making up the symptoms for attention and then asked me point-blank if I was lying about my pain level to skip school and suggested I had a mental health issue I was trying to cover for. I had frickin' GERD and severe acid reflux, as confirmed by the endoscopy he reluctantly agreed to perform on me. Instead of letting it go, the gastro made a point of angrily telling me that I had the stomach of an 80-year-old man and must have been intentionally eating in a way to F up my stomach. I have a family history of stomach problems and GERD. I don't understand why it was so implausible that my brother could have acid reflux at a young age, but I must be a hysterical liar when I claim to have the same symptoms in my teens. When I was about 4, I got diagnosed with child asthma. The doctor told my mum it was her fault because she decided to have a child despite having asthma herself. "I'm sure it's not that bad," said the intake nurse at the inpatient psychiatric unit that I was checking myself into after a self-deletion attempt following an attempt of the unspeakable act on me. "I'm okay. I did a short stay at the inpatient and everyone else who worked there, and honestly, and maybe more significantly, everyone else who was also staying there, was kind, thoughtful, helpful, and seemed to be much better at their jobs. And this was about 2 years ago now. Things are better, but not perfect. I think that sometimes that is hard, especially for people who are in my life. They seem to be waiting for a version of me that is perfectly fine, and I'm not sure she exists anymore. But it is better than it was, most of the time. Sometimes it's harder, or at least similar, but I'm still here, and sometimes being still here is okay being the only success for the day. I have my work, I have my son, I have my circle of people who really stuck by me, and that's a lot to hold on to." Today we learned that there are many doctors and nurses with a breathtaking lack of empathy or personal skills. Let's be thankful that these seem to be the minority in most cases, as a lot of these individuals immediately move on to more capable, compassionate caregivers. In the ER, about 6 months pregnant with heavy spotting and no noticeable fetal movement, idiot doctor is unable to find the baby's heartbeat. Just looks up at me and says, "Yep, probably dead in there." He couldn't possibly have said it in a more casual, offhand manner. Note that I delivered my son 3 months later, perfectly healthy. Different kind of doctor, it was a dentist. He said after poking that sharp piece of steel into my not dead yet gums, "Oh come on, it doesn't hurt that much," after I jumped and said ouch. I looked at him, got up and walked out. I now have a very nice dentist. He asked me if I felt I was lonely. I said I don't think of myself as lonely. He wrote down lonely and underlined it. I don't know why, but this strikes me as particularly funny, as if the doctor looked at you, narrowed his eyes, and then wrote it and underlined the word. I went to get a lump on my groin checked out and had to remove my underpants. The doctor started a whole speech about size isn't everything, which is not what I went there for. He said I should be happy carrying around a bit of weight, because in drought the fattest cows die last. Seriously, what the frick? I had gained a lot of weight around my midsection a few years back, and my times of the month stopped. I was scared, young, and thought I was pregnant, but the tests came back negative. I went to a doctor to have myself checked out, and she did some basic tests before telling me, "There's nothing wrong with you, you're just fat." I already had some body confidence issues, but hearing it from my doctor when I was trying really hard to get in shape really hurt. I worked hard to lose weight, but my belly wouldn't shrink. I was just starting to feel really sick, and I went back to the doctor, who again told me it was just that I was fat. I was crushed. A year later, I went to the hospital for something unrelated, and it was discovered I had a giant ovarian cyst about the size of a newborn. It was throwing off my hormones, making me gain weight, among many other issues. I've since lost weight, and I'm feeling super confident now, but that doctor really messed me up for a long time. Something similar happened to a friend of mine. She was slim, her stomach kept growing, and she was very firm to the touch. A female doctor told her she was pregnant. My friend said unless it's the second coming of Christ, she can't be, as she hasn't done the deed for months. The doctor tells her she must have gotten blackout drunk and done the deed with someone because she's definitely pregnant, no need for a test. Male doctor 2 was seen for a second opinion and pretty much straight away realized it was a giant cyst requiring surgery. "Oh, it's all between your ears," they said after missing at least one, but probably 2 crippling vitamin deficiencies by not ordering the right test. It took me 2.5 years of thinking I was lazy and pathetic before I went to another doctor and got diagnosed. I was having digestive issues I eventually learned were a result of my undiagnosed cancer. My first doctor had just suggested I should wipe better. I went to get an earache checked, and the first thing the doctor said was, yeah, so I'm going to put you on some medicine for the ear, but we've got to do something about your face. Your acne is absolutely terrible. Thanks, doc. Getting out of the army, you're 100% healthy. My medical record was about 6 inches thick. I went to a civilian doctor, and they were astonished anyone would say that. I am rated 80% disabled. My mother and grandfather were both injured in the army. They will do everything in their power to claim you're healthy, because if you're injured, they pay your medical bills for life. They tried to tell my grandpa that losing all of his teeth and having a crack on his forehead did not qualify him for a Purple Heart. I just don't know how you could be in so much pain being so young. I'm not going to be able to write you a prescription. My response was, "You're an idiot. I came in because I was hurt at work doing heavy construction. I'd never even asked for a prescription in the first place. I'd assumed I was getting an x-ray to see if I'd broken anything." I woke up in the hospital and heard a nurse running out saying, "He's awake!" The doctor comes into the room and tells me to move my toes. I ask them where I am and what's going on. He just gets more insistent at me to move your toes. I asked again where I was and what was going on, and he almost yelled at me, "Move your toes!" I said I am moving my toes, and immediately he says, "You'll never be able to walk again." And that's how I found out I was a paraplegic at 21 years old. I'd been in a single car wreck and was thrown 70 or 80 feet from the car, and my vertebra was dislocated and laying next to another one. I don't remember the car wreck, but that exchange with my doctor is burned into my brain, and that was 31 years ago. I had a seatbelt on, but I went off a small hill next to the interstate after clipping an end off the guardrail. Flipped the car down the hill, and seatbelt gave way under the pressure, and I went out the driver door window. My back collapsed around the door sill and dislocated one vertebra next to the one below it. I'm a big guy, 6'4" and 235 pounds at the time, and the force was too much for the seat structure. I found out all of these details over the next few weeks while I was in rehab. "Oh, you can't be in that much pain. You must have more energy than that." Turns out the lining of my nerves was being destroyed. I was becoming paralyzed. Painfully. I did a video chat service to talk to a doctor for 15 minutes. I told her my symptoms and thoughts since we were low on time. I'd been very sick for weeks, possibly urinary tract infection and respiratory infection. Also gave my other ideas from my symptoms. She told me I had valley fever and told me all about it over chat, and we got cut off at 15 minutes. I got her final email, which should have a prescription on it, and was told she actually thought I had somatic symptom disorder, aka that I was making all of this up and was perfectly fine. Her prescription was for a frickin' psychologist. She'd told me in detail about my possible valley fever, even though I said I hadn't been to the areas she said it was prevalent in. I made an appointment with my normal doctor and had a few tests run. Had a respiratory infection and a frickin' kidney infection. 10 or so days of medication and I was okay. My god, I was so angry at that quack though. Was it April Fools? Did they just grab someone off of Fiverr to cover for them that day while they were on a video consultation duty so they could head to the pub early? You know, I know every profession has the capacity to be unprofessional, but cops, soldiers, and doctors are the professions it's most jarring to hear about this kind of thing in. When I was 16 and dealing with partial deafness, look, sometimes being a teenage girl is hard, but it's hard to parent them too, so there's no need to exaggerate things to make things harder for your parents. Now knock it off, there's nothing wrong with you. 2 tumors, 9 surgeries, and a CSF leak later, yes, doctor, yes, there really was something wrong. I'd send that doctor a card with images of your tumors with a note that reads, "The inadequacy of your professional capabilities is a measurable danger to public health." I'd just gone through my second hip surgery following a car accident. The pain was persistent. My doctor said, "On the bright side, you'll qualify for a full hip replacement in 10 years. Frick my life, 10 more years of this crap and another surgery? You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. It wasn't said to me, but someone I knew. I work at a hospital, and so does my mother. We had a 43-year-old woman who had a very rare form of cancer that spread incredibly fast to just about everywhere in her body. From diagnosis to death was about 12 weeks. The medications and therapies and general lack of mobility caused her to become swollen and obese. She was a terribly sweet lady. They took her down to radiology for a scan, and the technician made a bunch of really mean comments about her weight because she was too large for our machines, so they had to arrange for a transfer to another hospital for her scans, and then have her transferred back. The technician thought that because Miss Jeannie was dying and sick, that she was deaf or didn't understand English any longer. So while they were alone, she made so many mean comments. Miss Jeannie waited until she was back in her room, waiting for her transfer, before she started crying. I'll never understand people who feel the need to make others feel less than or badly. Sadly, the tech still works for us. After years of fertility treatments, we finally got the wife knocked up. Just before the 12-week mark, they found something. The something was anencephaly. Not knowing what it was, we kept asking doctors what this meant and got very doctory answers. The prognosis isn't good, or it presents significant challenges to the fetus, all of which made it sound bad but somehow manageable. As we continued through the gambit of doctors, we eventually ended up with the one who had that declarative Scandinavian accent. When we asked him, "What does this mean for the child?" he answered, "His condition is incompatible with life. If it survives to birth, it will only live for days." It was at once soul-crushing and a relief. We finally knew how bad it was, but we knew what we had to do. The decision was no longer ours, and while it hurt, the clarity was welcome. Recalling this story many years later still makes me feel emotional. Finally worked up the courage to work on my mental health problems and asked my doctor for a recommendation to see a therapist. His only response was that I was too poor to get a therapist since my health insurance sucked. That was a bad day. I don't know if anyone will see this, but in perfect timing, my university was looking for therapy participants for a study. I now have 6 2-hour therapy sessions booked for free. I'm so happy. Thank you for all the replies and suggestions. I'm so appreciative. When I had a kidney stone, I was asked, "Why did you come to the ER? Why didn't you take Tylenol or something? This is a waste of my time." He made me cry. My ex used to tell me that I was a waste of resources all the time because I'd constantly be making doctor's appointments to figure out what was wrong. He felt pretty bad when I told him I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease a couple of years later. My doctor suggested that I have a baby because my nether regions were too tight and causing discomfort during the deed. Yeah, sure, I'll blast out a screaming ham and see if that increases my pleasure. As a doctor, I've got to tell you something that not many people are willing to admit. About 10 to 15% of all health professionals I've met during my time in school are just awful human beings who don't belong in medicine. They lie, cheat, and just don't care about people. On the flip side, you have about 15% of some of the greatest doctors you've ever met who follow up with you and care for you like you're their own family. 70% just fall somewhere in the middle. So the truth I'm getting at is that being a doctor isn't just the pursuit of those that care for others, but a representation of how our society is as a whole. This wasn't psychologically hurtful necessarily, but the most terrifying thing I've ever been told. "We're going to have to defibrillate you and we don't have time to sedate you." They rolled the crash cart with paddles into my room and I said, "Get that thing the frick away from me," and I almost cried. My mum was in the room with me and was absolutely hysterical. Thankfully, a cardiologist was able to look at my EKG in the nick of time and determined my heart rhythm was stable enough for me to just be transferred to a room for further evaluation without defibrillation. When I was 21, I went to a doctor for a checkup. The doctor asked me to lift my shirt, and I did. He immediately says, "Ugh," and makes a look of disgust on his face. I was an idiot and was gaining weight too quickly. Due to this, I had stretch marks. I've lost the weight and I'm a normal weight now, but I still can't shake that moment. This was 8 years ago. When I was just a little kid, my mum took me to the dentist and he was stabbing above and under my tongue and the inside of my cheeks with the tool that dentists use to clean your teeth and remove plaque, and he said, "If you cry, I'm going to start over." I started going to a dentist that had come highly recommended by a few different people. When I asked him about the possibility of straightening my front teeth, he said, "Well, you'll never be on the cover of Vogue, but I think we can help you out." I stopped going to him a few appointments later when he got mad at me for telling him that the filling he did months ago still really hurt. Okay, so I felt like the fear that a lot of kids have of dentists was just associated with their sharp tools and the vulnerability of the position, but now we've had a few in a row who seem like genuinely horrible, scary people. I don't know that this will help anyone with the fear of those particular medical practitioners, but at least we can say that now I understand your fear. To my wife, about 8 weeks pregnant at an oncologist office after a gynecologist saw a polyp she wanted someone to look at. The doctor said, "You need to have a hysterectomy immediately." We asked, "Shouldn't we wait until the biopsy results come back?" Doctor said, "No, in my opinion, if you want to live, you need to have a hysterectomy immediately." Turns out it was benign. Discoloration is normal for Pacific Islanders during pregnancy. The butthole got the results from biopsy the next day, and we weren't told the results until the following week. We waited. Our son is almost 16 now, and we never saw that doctor again. We knew that she received the biopsy results the next day because the mother-in-law was a doctor also, and the pathologist who did the biopsy ended up being a friend. Well, what are you going to do if your boyfriend would rather you had a larger chest? This was said by the doctor to 15-year-old me. I was getting a consultation for a chest reduction because sporting G-cup was a fricking nightmare. Still got the reduction, no regrets. The doctor said, "I can tell you're incredibly sick by your skin." I looked in the mirror. "Oh no, I always look like this. No, really, it's grey and sallow and the heavy dark circles under your eyes. You look clearly very unwell." "Really, I swear I always look like this without makeup." I really did look exactly how I do on a daily basis. Apparently, deathly. I should add that I was in A&E at the time due to a kidney infection. I'm now totally fine, but I still look exactly as I did that morning at 4 a.m. Not to me, but to my mum. The doctor said, "Oh, just let him hide in the bathroom." I hid in the bathroom when I got really bad headaches that turned out to be due to a brain tumor. The doc must have assumed I was tickling my pickle or something. Hiding in a bathroom is common for people who get migraines, FYI. The doctor, glancing at my nether regions, "You have herpes." "But I've never done the deed." "Oh, stop crying. I diagnose this all the time. It's pretty common. But aren't you at least going to do a test?" "Fine, but it's going to hurt and it's going to show exactly what I've said." It was, indeed, an allergic reaction to a medication. Me, with my pants down, getting checked for a hernia. "Are you able to get hard?" That is me hard." And for those of you asking why you need to get your rigidity checked for a hernia exam, you don't. The doctor was asking if I was able to get one, since a hernia can affect your genitals, and the doctor was just checking. I went to the doctor's office as a child because I was terribly ill and throwing up. The doctor asked if school exams were coming up. I said, "Yes." And she simply said, that explains it," and then she rolled her eyes. I had to take my son to the ER when he was 2 because he was having trouble breathing. The ER doc said he most likely had asthma, so she gave us an inhaler. Flash forward to 3 days when we go to have his follow-up with his pediatrician. Dr. Donkey goes, "So, he saw this ER doctor once in his life and you trusted her to make a lifelong determination that your son has asthma. That's pretty ridiculous." 6 months later, after 3 more ER visits with my son being unable to breathe, and Dr. Donkey says, "Looks like I owe you an apology. Turns out your son quite likely does have asthma." I mean, I'm surprised he apologized at least. New doctor took my height measurements and jots them down before issuing me a very casual, "Tall for a woman. I am a bearded man." I came in for something totally different and she commented on my stretch marks on my hips and around my chest. I was around 17 years old and I'd gotten them when I hit puberty because I'd developed so much in a short amount of time. I explained this to her, and she had a whole dialogue with herself about her originally thinking it would have been because I used to be fat, and after my explanation, just lamenting about how sad it was for me that I'd had to live my entire life with a body like that. I changed doctor the next day. At about 3 months pregnant, I started spotting. Spent about 10 hours at the hospital, lots of ultrasounds down there, lots of diagnostic testing. Nothing they can do. They tell me to go home and wait to miscarry. I was a wreck. It was now late, dark and rainy outside, but I don't have a way to get home because my hubby is at work with our only car. We were very young and poor. The doctor says the nurses have taxi vouchers they can give me to get home. I go to the nurses' station, ask for a taxi voucher, and the nurse says, "We only give taxi vouchers to women who have living babies. If you take anything away from this, please let it be the fact that young people sometimes need a little help navigating life." This nurse's one comment caused me years of being afraid to ask for things, for fear of not only being turned down, but also humiliated. In short, try not to be such a jerk. It was suggested to me that I'd confused a panic attack for a seizure, and to clarify, this was my first grand mal seizure. My father had them prior, and my mother witnessed both him having one and myself having mine. According to her, it was identical. I even hit all of the textbook marks of having had an epileptic seizure, from the memory loss to the post-tictal fatigue. The emergency room doctor didn't run any tests, or examine my family history of epilepsy. He simply noticed the anxiety disorder in my medical history and assumed that I was just having a panic attack, and wrote it off as my only issue being that I'd hit my head. Talking to my psychiatrist later about the incident, he confirmed based only on my account, corroborated with my mum's details where I couldn't fill in, that I'd definitely had a seizure, and he sent the orders for further testing himself. He also couldn't refrain from saying, "What the F is wrong with this doctor?" I'm glad that at least one of my doctors took me seriously. When did you realize that someone was basically too dumb to breathe? This guy burned down his convenience store for an insurance claim, but he stopped the milk and bread deliveries the day before. I demolished my right foot and a bunch of other stuff in a motorcycle crash, and I had to have the top of my foot removed. Guy I worked with asked me when it would grow back. I explained that the skin and stuff was going to have to be grafted, but the tendons and bones that had been removed were gone forever. He looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Well, why don't they just cut the whole frickin' thing off and let it grow back?" Going through security, and the person says I need to show a different form of ID. I ask why because I gave them my driver's license. They say I need a US document like a green card or something. I'm a US citizen. And then I realized. I explained how District of Columbia is long for DC, as in Washington, D.C., as in the capital of our country. Oh my god, I can relate. I'm from New Mexico. The number of people who think that we're a foreign country is astounding. Coworker bought a low-flow showerhead. He filled the bathtub using the new low-flow showerhead because he thought it would use less water. While driving from one big city to another, I stopped in a small town to eat at a fast food chain in Texas. I order my food, get my orange number 10, and sit down to wait for my order. The lady who's bringing out orders has this "I give up" demeanor as she's calling out numbers that guests just aren't claiming. Each time this happens, she speaks to a couple of tables to seemingly figure out who the food is for. Then I hear her call number 55 while holding a tray of food for one person. I was number 54 and noticed I was the only single-party guest at the place. We make eye contact and she heads towards me. She confirms my order with me and says, "Sorry, for some reason the computer prints one number higher." And I immediately ask, "Well then why don't you just call out one number lower than what's printed?" She freezes and I can see the gears turning in her head. I tell her, "Well, thanks," and she goes on her merry way. Well, some people are bad enough at math that they'd rather not do the work of -1, I suppose. No judgment, I can barely count under pressure. I'm an identical twin, and I've been asked all manner of utterly ridiculous questions about it throughout my life. But I think the stupidest was when a girl once asked me, "Do you ever get yourselves mixed up with each other?" And I responded, "Are you asking me if I ever think that I'm my brother?" And she replied, "Yeah." No, I don't. When I was in middle school, I was in art class with a boy named Devon. I told him my sister has the same name as him, and he asked me what her name was. The time I watched someone who'd missed their exit on the highway stop on the shoulder, back up, turn around, and go up to the entrance ramp, I could not frickin' believe it. A couple of fun details about this incident to really highlight its stupidity. The next exit was a few miles up the road. Going to that exit and then turning around might have delayed their drive by 15 minutes tops. There was no traffic ahead, and I watched this person do this as I was coming down that same entrance ramp to get onto the highway. I work for Parks Canada in Yoho National Park. I've been asked the question, seriously, where do you keep the animals at night? Twice in my career. To this day, I still find great joy imagining what they thought was going on each night as we collected every large animal in the parks. I was a co-hostess with a girl in a restaurant, watching ads on a hanging TV for a new movie. At the end, it said, "Coming soon to a theater near you." To which she turned to me with wide eyes and genuinely asked, "How do they know where I live?" There are so many more stories about this chick, but this one sums it up the best. She also had to stop walking to drink anything or she'd fall over, and she didn't understand that not all women have to wax their mustaches because not all women have them. She was 20. We were talking about a similar story this weekend. My aunt used to go to the movies when she was younger and write down the names of the previews. I guess she missed the movie name and wrote it down as "Coming Soon." It's been like 20 years and my uncles, her brothers, still ask her if she's seen the movie Coming Soon. It's probably streaming on Pornhub. This was my first experience in retail where I learned what many customers would be like. The seasons were changing, so we put a lot of shirts we had to get rid of in the front and made them 50% off. I was working the register when a woman came up to buy her things. I rang her up and I could see the look on her face like something was wrong. And then the following happened.
Why is this so much?
Pardon me?
This should only be $10, not $20.
I thought that maybe her item was on sale, so I asked if she could point out the sign because I wasn't aware of it. It was a small store and we didn't have to walk anywhere, so she just pointed,
"This sign here."
"Okay, this sign says that all shirts are 50% off."
"Yes, so why is this full price?"
"This is a hat." We asked our classmate to prove she knew the 7 continents. Her list went like this: North America, Europe, China, the Pacific Ocean. I'm not even bullcrapping you. Damn, to think that she missed Mount Everest, the Pacific Ocean, and the Polar Express. It's like they aren't even teaching geography in schools anymore. Sad, really. Watching a man try to open the locked front door of my shop while a bright red closed sign was literally inches from his face. He kept looking at the door like it was just stuck. Summer camp counselor made all of the kids on a school bus keep the windows up on a hot day because they could feel the air conditioning coming from the front of the bus. It was so hot, and I, maybe 10 years old at the time, had to explain to the 40-year-old counselor that the air conditioning they were feeling was the wind coming in through the bus driver's open window. She still didn't believe me. I begged her to ask the bus driver to confirm the bus did not have air conditioning, but she didn't want to bother him while he was driving. It was like a 1-hour bus trip. She finally got hot enough and asked the bus driver if the bus had air conditioning, and he jokingly said, "The bus only has air conditioning when the windows are down and the wheels are turning." She looked back at me and said, "See? I told you the bus had air conditioning," and proceeded to force us to keep the windows up. There was a girl in my high school who forced the teacher to pause a documentary about people living in mud huts in Africa because she was upset that they were showing us fictional movies in a history class. It took everybody else in the room to convince her that people actually live like that in some places. That's wealthy area living for you. I was friends with the guy who believed those fake Apple adverts like, "Apple Wave, microwave your phone for instant battery charge." I was so dumbfounded that he actually fell for it. When I saw him the week after, he had a new phone and it all clicked for me. When I was younger, I was mad that everyone else had an accent and I didn't. 3 years later, I realized that I did in fact have an accent and that I was on another level of stupid. Back when the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster happened, we were discussing how the reactor had failed in science class. 5 minutes into the conversation, a girl piped up and said, "I don't see what the big deal is. Why can't we just regrow it?" She thought that a nuclear power plant was a plant. Oh, bless. Well, she's trying, giving solutions rather than just problems. But yes, yet another demonstration of why when someone says, "Why don't you just?" 8 times out of 10, you're about to hear one of the stupidest things you've ever heard. Knew a girl in middle school that didn't understand the concept of perspective. She also thought that north was whichever direction you were facing at the time.
How much is $50 worth?
This girl was the newest teller that my boss had hired. I will never forget that moment. I had someone ask me, "Is Europe on Earth?" "Well, actually, Europa is a moon on Jupiter." A friend didn't have coins for a vending machine, but did have $1. She folded up the dollar and forced it into the coin slot and then just didn't understand why she didn't get her item. For me, I had a concussion and I was getting x-rays taken. They gave me a lead blanket to wrap around my twig and berries. I took it and wrapped it around me like a cape. I couldn't understand what they wanted me to do. Someone in my history class argued that Mussolini was a type of pasta. I was helping a colleague with his graduate thesis film. My job was to animate a solar eclipse, since we couldn't shoot one for real. I animated it using some real-life reference footage to make it look realistic. When I showed him, he asked why the moon was black and had no detail. I asked him if he'd ever seen a solar eclipse, and he replied, "Yes, of course, but I want this one to look surreal since it's the moon in front of the sun. It's not like a normal solar eclipse." At this point, it became clear something was amiss, and after asking a few more clarifying questions, it became clear that he had no idea that the large object passing in front of the sun during a solar eclipse was in fact the moon. I confronted him about it, and he apologized for not being great with astrology. A friend of mine worked in a call center for a credit card company in the disputes department. The number one item that people called to say they never purchased was interest charge. Ugh. I used to work with a girl who was so sweet, but so dumb. We were in a meeting once and somehow someone mentioned baked ham. My manager said, "Ugh, I hate ham. It looks like human flesh." The girl I mentioned was sitting next to me and looked horrified and whispered, "Does ham really come from people?" A group of late teens sitting outside my building, assuring each other that all the criminal charges would be dropped when they reached 21. DUIs, substance charges, traffic violations, everything. I walked away shaking my head because they were in for a reality check. When I was a kid, I had an old transistor radio. I asked my parents for a newer radio so that I could receive and listen to newer music. Whoops. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. At the time I was working at a grocery store that had a Coinstar machine. Basically, you could place all of your unwrapped change in it and it would be converted for a small fee that you could use for actual cash. I was walking past and I noticed a woman struggling with the machine. I stopped to help her. Turns out she'd accidentally hit Spanish as a language selection. I quickly explained what she needed to do, figuring she couldn't read Spanish as we were in the US, and this is where her struggles came from. So I run through how it works and I show her where the receipt will print out that she can turn in at a customer service for the cash. She turns and looks at me and says, "But I don't want Spanish money." I then have to explain to her that she'd get paid in US dollars. Rescued a co-worker on the side of the road with a flat tire. Waiting for the tow truck, I pointed out the nail at the top of their tire. They scoffed and looked at me like I was the stupidest person in the world and exclaimed, "That's not the cause. Look, the tire's flat at the bottom." I just walked away and never brought it up again. We were talking about the Irish potato famine in college, and this one girl said, "Oh wow, I thought it was the potato family." As if that wasn't enough, she later asked, "Why were they so eager to get jobs? If I was that hungry, I wouldn't even try to get a job." Man, I wish I was joking. I was once asked how it felt to come to the US as a refugee. I'm from Germany. She then looked rather surprised when I told her that the leader of the Third Reich had been dead for 75 years and that Germany is one of the more liberal countries in the world these days. She full-on thought that I'd fled a Germany that hadn't changed since pre-World War II. I got a concussion a while back. A friend of mine told me not to come close because it might be contagious. And sadly, they weren't kidding. A girl in my school had gotten about 3 concussions within a year, and when she hit her head the 4th time and blacked out for a minute, she refused to go to the doctor because the last time they said if I got another concussion it would cause brain damage, so I'm not going to let them give me another one. I had to explain to a woman that apples didn't contain any gluten, meat, or dairy ingredients. How can one think apples contain dairy? Or meat? She thought gluten was found in every major grain and that apples were a grain because they have seeds. I had to explain to a girl why you couldn't grow your hair down in front of your face and just cut out eye holes. Even explaining it to her, she couldn't grasp it and brushed me off as being too smart. I had a coworker who could never figure out what time her 15-minute break was over. We were both bank tellers. Ex-flatmate cancelled the gas and electricity contract because it was too expensive. I wondered why we had no more electricity nor gas. She thought we paid €90 a month to get a hotline 24/7 in case of a problem. I was friends with a couple who only had enough money to pay either the cable bill or the electricity, so they paid the cable. A couple of days later, the power was turned off. And so they sat in the dark, cold but secure in the knowledge that if they had a working TV, it would be showing the cable. I joke, they probably thought that the TV provider would magically keep it powered via the network. My friend is allergic to walnuts. One day he made his sandwich in our college dorm. It had walnuts garnished on top of the bread. I then remember him telling me, "Oh look, there's walnuts on here," and proceeds to eat the entire sandwich. At the time, I didn't know he was allergic or I would have stopped him. I leave to shower, and when I come back, there are 2 paramedics in our dorm taking him out on a stretcher. The following day, I asked what happened, to which he replies something along the lines of, "I accidentally ate some walnuts which I'm allergic to, and by the time I went to get a Benadryl, my throat had started to close, and I couldn't swallow it, so I had to call 911. I was just utterly shocked how he even let this entire situation happen. I really couldn't believe it. He had known there were walnuts on the bread. He pointed out the walnuts on the bread to me and still ate it. College days, am I right? Once at my old job, a coworker came out the back and I offered him some chocolate somebody had dropped off for us. He thanked me and popped it in his mouth and then chewed it for a bit and cheerfully asked me, "Oh, do you know if there's nuts in this, by the way? I'm allergic to them, so I really shouldn't be eating chocolate." And I was like, "What? I've literally never seen a bar of chocolate that didn't contain the 'may have traces of nuts' warning. Why are you eating this?" And he goes, "Ah yeah, good point," and spat it into the bin and then happily wandered back out front like nothing had happened. In high school, I met a boy who asked me for a hygienic cloth because he thought he had a period. Actually, he only sat on a melted popsicle. An old coworker was telling me that there's people out there that think Alaska is an island. I laughed in disbelief, but another coworker overheard and was flabbergasted. "What? It's not? But it's always drawn off to the side of Hawaii." Point made. Another time, a guy with a really thick accent walked in. Some girl was like, "Oh wow, I like your accent. Where are you from?" He answered, "Have a guess," and her response, "Have a guess? I've never heard of that place before." And she walked away. She's a really nice person, just slightly oblivious. I teach high school English. I was working with a small 9th grade group and I found out that all 4 of them thought that Alaska was an island. And they weren't kidding. I grabbed a globe to show them and one of them asks, "But how recent is that map?" I laughed really hard, but I discovered once again that it was not a joke. I worked at a meat desk for a summer job and a woman came in and asked if we had any meat without spices or sauces. She then proceeded to tell us that the doctor had said that her dogs got sick because she kept feeding them pizza and they couldn't handle the spices. She then said, "Oh, but they love pizza so much. I feel bad for them. I'm probably still going to feed them pizza." My wife's cousin and her husband, and not baby daddy of her unborn child, fell on a self-induced hard time and needed a place to stay for a bit. We set up a queen-sized air mattress in the living room for them, and for 3 weeks I woke up to go to work, and every morning I saw them sleeping on it sideways with their legs hanging off the edge. Then one day she asked me to buy her a bigger air mattress because this one was hard on their backs. I told her to turn her body, and her response was that then they wouldn't be able to see the TV. Then frickin' turn the air mattress to face the TV. And that's the story of how I became the butthole to the trailer trash side of the family. The bad part is that it's only one of many stories. The husband was a cook at Applebee's, the baby daddy was a cook at Applebee's, and her new husband was, well, another cook at the same frickin' Applebee's. They all worked together. I work retail. Had a customer during the pandemic pull her mask down to cough into the open air and then pull it back up. Really makes you wonder why there are people like this in the world. I once forgot to bring my laptop to school, so my mum had to bring it in. My maths teacher was notified and sent me a message telling me to pick up my laptop at the front office, but the only way I could see the message was if I had my laptop with me. My boss asked me to file the spam mail. This man was one of those people who think that they're the smartest person in the room. So, spam folder. Okay. Weird, but okay. I couldn't find any spam mail that wasn't already in the spam folder. The afternoon comes around and he stomps over to my desk and wants to know why the spam isn't in the spam folder as he throws a manila folder on my desk. The folder was labeled spam. He prints spam mail out and files it. and with any sign of skepticism on my face, he'd insist the IT guy told him that's where the spam goes, so he got himself a folder and that was it. I had to get the frick out of that job. I worked at a pet store in college. This customer asked me which food would make his pit bull swole. I suggested a high-protein food with a good amount of exercise, but advised that a lot of it was determined by the dog's genetics. He asked me if we sold genetics. This time a friend told me how much he hates potatoes while eating French fries, and I literally blew his mind by telling him that French fries are potatoes. My friend was taking a selfie. The camera was smudged, so he told him he should clean it. He then turned his phone over and began cleaning the camera on the back, then turned it back over and tried to take a selfie again with the other camera. I once had two people come up to me arguing about whether spiders exist. Well, in fairness, only one of those was breathtakingly stupid, or at least ignorant, or they were both trying to play the same prank on each other. In any case, I think anyone who partakes or listens to that conversation long enough would just start dropping IQ points. I once worked in a Midwestern grocery store deli, and I was trying to explain to a woman that the name brand and generic brand of the macaroni salad that we carried were in fact identical. The woman yelled at me saying she could only have the generic brand because one's made with mayo and the other's made with mayonnaise, and I don't like mayo. When I tried to explain that mayo is an abbreviation of mayonnaise, she just said, "I'm from the South, I know my food sugar," and tutted away. I met a guy who got hit by a train. Not that bad, but a year later he wanted to show his daughter where and how he got hit by a train, and he got hit again. I locked my purse with my keys and a cell phone in my apartment. I went to the office to ask maintenance to let me in. The woman at the desk said that she'd call maintenance and asked for a phone number that they could reach me at. I said there wasn't one because my cell phone was locked in my apartment. She insisted that she needed a number. I said I could give her the number, but that I wouldn't be able to answer if they called. She suggested I get my phone out of my apartment so that I could answer when they called. I rolled my eyes at her and said if I could get in my apartment to get my cell phone, I wouldn't need maintenance to let me in. She never did understand me, but maintenance did show up 10 minutes later. Okay, and since a lot of people are asking, you don't need a key to lock the door to the apartment, just to unlock it. On the way out the door, I turned the lock on the back of the doorknob and then pulled the door shut, locking the door. I'd put my keys in my purse because I was also carrying a laptop bag and a few other things. I thought I picked up my purse with my other bags, but I hadn't. Yes, I know, I was stupid for locking myself out. What did your workplace do that made you realize you had to run? I had a wall of crazy where the CEO wanted to spend $20,000 on cool and edgy stuff for the office, and staff could make suggestions. He wanted things like slides, beanbags, napping pods, stuff like that. The project was scrapped when the top suggestions ended up being desks, chairs, working heating, working Wi-Fi, and health insurance. Hearing our CEO say, compensation is only one part of the employment experience, during an earnings call when he was answering complaints about underpaying his employees after we had reported record profits. I learned at an internship that we work hard and play hard means that we want you to work 75-hour weeks, but sometimes we'll put donuts in the break room. If there are any leftovers from the client meetings, that is. Not my company, but a company from a neighboring building. They had an entire area devoted to foosball, pinball, billiards, console gaming, and video key booths on the ground floor, and it was clearly visible because of the glass windows on street level. Oddly enough, nobody ever used that floor, and the place was almost always empty save for a few people who used the internet kiosks. When I learned a friend worked there, I asked why nobody would want to take the opportunity to use the awesome-looking recreational facility, and he told me that people who do use the facility often found it used against them during performance evaluations, even when their use wasn't excessive at all. After a while, word got around and they started avoiding the place altogether. The irony is that their recruitment ads always touted a culture of work hard, play hard. The place I'm just about to leave, handed in my notice last week, bought a pool table for the breakout space earlier in the year. It's horrible and cheap and not fun to play on anyway. But I've seen colleagues get ushered back to their desks partway through a game at 12:59 because they were in danger of overstaying their lunch break. They always make sure to show potential new hires that they have it, though. They also bought an Xbox with no games, and then complained about wasting money because nobody was using it. Why is nobody having fun? I specifically requested it. Although this is worse than hold, because they'll actively hound and punish you for doing the thing they're telling you to do as well. Ugh. Oh, we have a great culture, lots of team lunches and drinks. When I started, our boss had banned the social club, birthday celebrations, or recognition of birthdays, strictly no cake, taken away the Christmas party, the Christmas break period, and tried to stop people talking to each other. All the while, she'd take every second day off and have long weekends every weekend. We had maybe 3 team lunches in the time that I was there, and she always made sure to tell us that we wouldn't be paid for anything over our lunch break, even though she came too. We had to submit manual timesheet corrections to remove the amount we took. It's like, okay, fair enough, but can't you just let it slide? It's not your money, and we're talking about maybe 20 minutes here. A client also invited me to their Christmas party due to our close relationship and my good work on their files, and my boss called them and told them I wasn't allowed to go. She told me it was because she was concerned I might reflect badly on the department. Ironic, really. Lush, when we couldn't say bathroom on the shop floor and instead had to ask the manager for serenity. I think I'd just go around yelling, "Serenity, now!" I worked at the B&Q and one of my colleagues was stabbed 30 times by a customer. I was completely shaken. The next morning we were taken into a big room and made to sign a document saying we wouldn't sue them. If we didn't sign, we'd lose our jobs. Also, that colleague was stabbed only a month after they got rid of our security guard to save money. This happened a couple of weeks ago, when HR sent out an email to management, excluding me and about 2 other people, telling them to fraudulently leave good reviews on Glassdoor and to coerce others to do the same. I'll refrain from mentioning the company at this time, however it looks like this is a common issue and there needs to be a better way to call this out. Our CEO sent out an internal email whining about people posting bad reviews on Glassdoor. He said that we should keep our feedback in-house. Yeah, guy, you're cutting every department past the bone to cut costs to raise share prices so you can sell the company and make 8 figures when your options vest. Clearly, you're going to care about my criticism of your strategy. I was at a fast casual restaurant for a couple of months and the GM always talked about the culture. You know what's a great culture? When the morning shift and night shift have their daily screaming matches over crap that they each accused the other one of needing to do. It was impressive just how incompetent the entire company was from ownership down. Not me, but my husband worked for 2 weeks for a family-owned and operated business that touted how important family was and that they were all one happy family. My husband was on his way to drop our, at the time, 2-year-old son off at daycare before work when our son threw up all over himself. Husband called his employer to tell them what happened and that he needed to take his son home and clean him up, but he'd be in ASAP. His manager told him he needed to get his priorities straight. I can say I'm proud of my husband for responding with, "Yeah, you know what? You're right. I won't be back in at all." He was still working part-time at his previous job, where they'd been sad that he was leaving, so he called them and told them to put him back on the schedule full-time. That family business is currently in the process of liquidating assets before going out of business, and I cackle every time I drive past it. Last year I was working as a subcontractor and I was assigned a new place of work. Just 2 weeks after I started, the new boss wanted to hire me. He put down the contract where, compared to my current contract, pay was down 25%, average weekly hours went up by 20%, vacation days went down by 10%, and I wouldn't have a company car for personal use anymore. Before he actually handed me the contract to read, he said, "I'll only make you this offer once, but it's only valid if you change all of your pictures on your social media and you sell your car. It's too flashy for our company." How about no? This is for a flight centre headquartered in Brisbane, Australia, but they're a global company trading under many names. I think it's Liberty Travel in the States. Anyway, everything about the company internally screams cringe. Everyone treats the CEO like a frickin' god. His name is Screw, and when he takes a selfie, it's called a scroofy. Ugh. And they opened a foreign exchange ATM at the head office that they called the Scrutm, which sounds like scrotum if you ask me. It's frickin' ridiculous. When my art director wanted to get a pro bono poster on verbal abuse done faster by screaming at the designer. When I went to firm drinks in a public bar and the firm's fun committee handed out song sheets and a choir of employees led by a bad guitarist sang a song about how great the firm was to the tune of "'Cause I'm Happy." We were expected to sing along. It was at that moment I realized I was in a cult. When I went to my first corporate manager's rally when I worked at Domino's, I thought this would be a cool, free catered lunch and it counted as a workday. Then they started the rally with the company cheer. I'm like, what the frick, we're adults. Why are we cheering? I looked around and way too many people were into this cheer. I realized that job wasn't going to be the one for me. When I had to phone around to the corporation leaders to find out why none of the mechanics I'd interviewed were hired, the mechanics had all come from all over the country and some had waited patiently for months to know if they got the job or not. Turned out the CEO had changed his mind and wanted me to take care of all mechanic work. I was the factory manager. But they knew I'd be upset, so neither he, HR, or the COO wanted to be the one to tell me. I worked at this business that was really keen on telling everyone that they were like a family and chastising me for not going to company parties and stuff, but that also refused to pay overtime and expected me to work late 2 or 3 times a week, as well as doing a 14-hour day twice a month for stocktake and end of month. Apparently, because we're a family, we're all expected to chip in on the big days, except it was literally just us bottom-tier workers who had to stay late. I quit that place and never looked back. Yes, it would appear that we're like a family is one of the biggest red flags one can look out for in the working world. Although I suppose, we're a job, you come here, conduct a service, and are compensated for said service doesn't quite have the same whimsical note. I worked for a company that prides itself on being in the top 100 places to work in the US. They brought the hospital I was working for while I was doing IT work there. For a year, they let me stay at the current hospital I was working at with a team for countless hours getting ready to switch out IT infrastructure over to match the place's new software. We changed out all 900 computers at our location, and after that was done, I was then told that in the next few months I'd have to commute to the main campus to keep my job, a drive that for me was over 5 hours round trip. They didn't offer me to transfer or even pay compensation for driving there. I was literally forced to quit at that point, all because a new manager took over on the new fiscal year and decided that the IT department I was in needed to all be at the main campus. When our university's VP explained that the goal of every tenured faculty member was to write enough grants to pay our salaries and replace us with TAs. Every semester, ideally every undergrad class. Also, would be under a hiring freeze but could feel free to be creative and use temporary grant money to hire tenured faculty. Also, would all be paying an extra $250 a year in parking fees to fund a new student parking lot. Dear Lord, I was glad I'd already decided to leave. Bought out by an equity group. The new president, on call with thousands of employees, says, "We have 2 kinds of employees, those that work a tremendous number of hours and those that should find another company to work for." My last job was an independent school in the UK, the wealthy sort. During a period of streamlining, the entire faculty were called into a hall and told in upbeat terms that we were struggling to make ends meet. Salaries were too high, perks were too abundant, and spending was unsustainable. For clarity, salaries weren't too high and perks were practically non-existent. Spending was definitely unsustainable, however, in part because they were spending hundreds of thousands redesigning the senior staff offices to hide all the cabling and install proper wood paneling. So then they started listing off perks and assigning them a value. For example, free parking. Well, no crap, the school has a lot of land and isn't in a city. Why would you charge? Secondly, nice surroundings. Well, again, no crap, that's part of your marketing appeal. Long holidays? Nice try, but I work all holiday. They didn't even get as far as telling me what they planned to do with my job and pay. I was gone in less than 3 months. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My district manager told me to talk my key holder out of going back to college. Mind you, she wanted to be a doctor. They were proud that nobody had degrees. That's fine, but I'm not working more than 45 hours a week and mandatory holidays just to sell some shoes. The loyalty my coworkers had was so cringy. They didn't understand how we were being taken advantage of because we didn't get our degrees. Anyway, F you, going back to school was the best decision I've made. We, the management team, spent months working with a business coach trying to collectively come up with meaningful core values. We devoted a ton of time to it and really tried to decide which directions we wanted to take the company culture. Everybody agreed on teamwork, reliability, a couple of others that I can't remember now, And then one day the owner came in and called a meeting. He sat us down in the boardroom and told us he spent all weekend brainstorming and had decided on the core values. They were meaningful, ownership, neighborhood, engagement, you. Does anybody see what that spells? He literally just wanted it to be money and came up with words that sort of worked the way you do in elementary school writing your name poem. He rebranded the entire company from t-shirts with giant first letters and small letters for the rest of the word, straight down the arms, to plaques, wraps on the cars, fricking everything. And that's when we all knew it was going to get bad. Money's great, but it was mortifying walking and driving around with that plastered everywhere. I knew what I was in for when I started actually working on the floor and management was nowhere to be found. I work in the complaints department and we don't have a lot of managers. I had a belligerent customer demand a manager for his issue. I was told management were all busy, but to tell him one would give him a call back at 4. All day I asked who was calling him back at 4 and told it would be sorted. At 3:55 I was told I have to call him back. He wasn't best pleased. I worked at a popular travel stop/oversized gas station. It's practically a state icon. They're famous for their good wages for a low-income job. There's a huge sign over every entry with the starting wages around $13 per hour in a state where minimum wage is $7.25. Customers think it's a great place to work. They literally fired a girl for having a stroke. We treat our employees like family. Ignores harassment claims, hires from outside the company, refuses to give out decent pay, will write you up for doing overtime, but the CEO just bought himself a new BMW. I hate that place. When I took a 40% pay cut with no change in workload by being moved to salary. I worked at an animal hospital that wanted to be, and probably is to some, the best hospital in the city. Had the most modern equipment, looked incredibly nice inside, good Yelp ratings, and on top of that, we were told during hiring that we were a huge family and everyone loved each other. This could not be more wrong. This place was the epitome of superficial. The turnaround rate was out of control and people absolutely hated each other. The pay was horrible, even though we charged double the amount of any other hospital for our extensive care. I gave management some credit for their effort, but it was more about hiding issues instead of addressing them. We couldn't talk about our concerns because it was considered gossip, and people were fired frequently for this. And apparently they've now put audio recorders throughout the hospital to listen in on employees' conversations. I honestly don't know how anyone still works there. We had a problem with the client, and the boss dumped all of the blame on a 24-year-old woman who was basically his most loyal employee. He made her cry in front of the client, as if that would somehow help save the relationship. Treat every dollar like it was your own. Yeah, right after we went well over targets for the entire year, and then was told a Christmas party wasn't financially viable because of expenses. It's one of the biggest hospitality groups in Australia, by the way. See, America? You may have the market cornered in blatant employee mistreatment in the first world, but the rest of us are catching up to you and we'll get there. I'm in management and we just got the message that bonuses for the last financial year were severely cut across the business, probably going to receive 30% of our total potential at best. Then attended our financial end-of-year results meeting the next day to be told that net profits were 18% up, nearly $1 billion total, and the best performance in years, all thanks to us. Okay, planning on leaving now. This is what the woman who interviewed me said. Here at Cheapskate Architects, we don't often do all-nighters for our customers, but when we do, it's a real pizza party. Also, we don't pay overtime, we do it for the love. And your wage is $22K even though you're an architect. And also, I won't be there because I'm HR management, because I'm married to the director. Yes, we need an HR department even though there's 3 employees. A co-worker was forced to work while her mother was dying in hospice. Mum dies, she quits, and they escort her off the premises like a criminal. When my boss planned an office day trip to the car show and brewery, and then only invited the guys in the office. Even worse, when one of the women said we should all go, he said, No, but why don't you girls have a spa day instead? He also put on a hella racist accent whenever he talked about his many Asian clients. Obviously, there were all other issues, but those 2 stand out. Go F yourself, Tony. They changed the title of the receptionist to Director of First Impressions. For everyone asking, it's a tiny company in the Midwest. At Big W here in Australia, think Walmart but no weapons, they changed the door greeter title to Customer Champion. Stupidest frickin' thing I've ever heard, and all the managers thought it was genius. when I was asked to do the deed with a potential client. At the time, I was in my early 20s. I'm female. Looking back, I realized that I had more going on looks-wise than I knew back then. This was decades ago. My boss, the business owner, always told us that he thought of the office as being one big, you've guessed it, family. He also referred to the female employees as his girls. A new client was coming into the office. My boss called me into his office and told me he was going to give me the company credit card so I could take the potential new client out for dinner and drinks. He told me to sleep with him. We need this client if everyone wants to get paid. Nice added pressure. I said no, and the next day I quit. A couple of months earlier, my boss had invited me over to his house for dinner with his family and to swim in his pool because he said he knew how hard I'd been working. I was a little surprised that he'd finally noticed and thought it was kind that he wanted to do something nice for me. I got there, and his wife and kids are gone, but there's a 25-year-old guy in his pool, the son of a client who just got out of the army. He told me he was trying to fix me up on a date because I needed to get out more. Like an idiot, I believed him. It wasn't until later I realized he was hoping I'd show more interest in the guy. I found out later that he'd asked all of the female employees at one point to sleep with clients. The secretary actually did. She was a young, single mum and was worried she'd be fired if she said no. After I quit, she told me she wished she had the option to quit. I didn't realize what she was saying until we talked later. At the time, this guy's daughter was around 4 years old. When I quit, I asked him how old would his daughter have to be before he asked her to sleep with clients. I thought he was going to hit me. I have 1,000 stories about working at that place. The guy was an unethical idiot. A dangerous combination. But I learned a lot about how to not run a business from him. I've owned my own business for 30 years now. I've never asked an employee to sleep with clients, or even go out for drinks. I had the benefit of growing up in a family with money. I wasn't earning much and would probably not have been able to quit and move on without the assistance from my parents. I never told them what happened. When I told my dad I quit, he was happy. Oh, you hated that place. Now that I'm older and times have changed, I would know what to do. I'd hope he'd have faced consequences. Today, this isn't considered a regular part of business. The Me Too movement wasn't really a thing back then. Nobody really cared. This was the only time I was directly asked to sleep with a client, but not the only time I faced unwanted attention at work. It was so common for me and my friends that when we pushed back against it, we felt like we were really on the leading edge of changing work environments for women. I guess we were, but sad that we needed to be. I certainly hoped women didn't face this anymore, but the recent news set me straight on that. I worked at Outback. The amount of team meetings and mandatory enthusiasm was ridiculous. I was given the chance to backpack across Europe with some friends for 3 weeks one summer. I told my manager and she goes, 3 weeks? I don't know, you'll have to work really hard up until then and I'll let you know if you can take that time off. I straight up told her, it's not if you let me go, it's if you still let me work here when I get back. Yeah, when I got back, I immediately started looking for new jobs. When attending a management retreat and was pressured into buying charity raffle tickets that I couldn't afford, $20, the 2 people who won before me donated their winnings to the same charity they bought the raffle tickets from. They were middle management who made more than $100K each and they were trying to look really good. I made $32K with a young daughter. I won a drawing of $400. I literally had nausea for 2 days trying to figure out how I was going to pay my bills after my job had just moved the goalposts on some sales performance bonuses I had coming my way, dropping it effectively from $1,000 to $200. And now I'm the butthole who's going to keep the money that I won. I guess I'm not a team player. As a bonus, this was 4 hours drive from home, had an overnight stay, and one of those middle management jerks, in an example of what should be on or off the clock, said we shouldn't be paid for the drive to the retreat. Frick you. I was on the clock from the time I left Friday until I got home on Sunday. If you're forcing me to be somewhere as part of my job, it's all on the clock. My district manager didn't like that, and I was already looking for the door. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.